Hello and welcome to the Gladiator Podcast, your place for Gladiator news and content. Here today, myself is Joker Bunny, along with
UFO,
as well as
Seismic Lawns,
and also
Lightning.
And we're here today to talk about a very interesting topic, as you've probably seen. We're talking about the Mystical Archive set review. Yes, the Mystical Archive is coming to Arena. Yes, they're all going to be legal in Gladiator, even the ones that are not legal in Historic. At least as far as we know, because that decision has not been made at this time. But we're going to be talking about all these cards for Gladiator. We're only going to be talking about the cards that are new to Arena. So, as pretty as that Opt is, and as much as Mink continues to talk about Opt, we are not talking about Opt today. Opt is a single blue instant that scries one and draws a card.
We are not talking about Opt, they say right before talking about Opt.
I felt like that was a good bit to get things started, I don't know.
Also, Joker, how do you obtain these banned historic cards?
That's a great question, UFO. Thanks for that start to a throw. Cards that are banned in Historic are going to be a bit harder to collect than other cards, as opening banned cards isn't something that you can do in Arena store packs. Not without a lot of work, at least. So, it's going to be better for you to craft them or to draft them while you're doing Strixhaven drafts, as they'll still be able to show up there, even though they're banned in the Historic format. Now, with that, I think it's time for us to get started, don't you think, Seismic?
I do. And let's get started with Day of Judgment. 2 white for a sorcery with 3 words of rules text. Destroy all creatures. I'm really excited for this card just in the context of having another 4 mana Wrath available to us. I think we're getting to the point where dedicated control decks can start actually cutting 4 mana Wraths. And so the fact that we get one that is at the very least better than Shatter the Sky works really well for making sure that control decks are just pushing their line of quality and their Wraths higher. And, you know, occasionally there's going to be a deck that just wants every Wrath, and now they can not lose to having 2 5-mana Wraths in hand, because they instead have a 4-mana Wrath.
Down with Shatter, up with Judgment.
I mean, you probably still play Shatter the Sky over some of the 5-mana Wraths that exist.
Oh yeah, 5-mana Wraths are pretty bad for the most part, but Day of Judgment at the very least might make the 4-mana Wrath spot a little bit competitive, since we have, I want to say, 4 different copies of that effect in white.
I mean, depends on what you count. Settle the Wreckage.
Settle the Wreckage is just better than all of them. That's what matters.
It's very different.
Better. Clearly. Strictly. Obviously.
Very well.
Speaking of strictly better, we have Ephemerate, which is a single white mana for an instant that says, exile target creature you control, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. And it also has Rebound, where if you cast this spell from your hand, it gets exiled as it resolves, and then, at the beginning of your next upkeep, you may cast the card from exile without paying its mana cost. UFO, why don't you tell us about what kind of busted stuff you're planning on doing with Ephemerate?
There's a lot of different options we have available to us. And there's some known busted things to do, where you're looping a way to return the Ephemerate from your graveyard to hand on a creature. So, in Modern, that's used with Eternal Witness. In Gladiator, we have to use Salvager of Secrets or Shipwreck Dowser, both of which effectively have the same card text for our situation, where they return target instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. Ephemerate allows you to do 1 ETB that gives you the Ephemerate back, and 1 ETB that gives you back any card you want that fits those criteria. Considering the Mystical Archive is now adding, 63 pretty powerful instants and sorceries into Arena, in addition to the other ones we have around, rebuying some of these is going to be very powerful. I'm also sure that there's other ways to really fully break Ephemerate, but it's going to be unique to Gladiator, and it's going to be hard to find for the first few weeks. So keep at it and keep seeing what Ephemerate will do.
I'm really excited to just use this as the best flicker effect that we have and probably will ever have.
Yeah, that's very true. It's not at all comparable to anything else when it comes to being worse than it. Like, our best effect is Cloud Shift, and I'm pretty sure Ephemerate will just blow that out of the water in almost every case, other than some very specific ones.
Cloud Shift, for those wondering, is the same card as Ephemerate, but without rebound.
Also, notably doesn't say owner's control.
Oh wow, it really doesn't.
Nope.
I did not know that.
Yeah, Cloud Shift does some dumb stuff, but not here.
And now moving on to other effects that grind out with value, we can now go to Joker Bunny for Gift of Estates, a sorcery for 1 and a white that says, if an opponent controls more lands than you, search your library for up to 3 plains cards, reveal them, put them into your hand, then shuffle. Joker Bunny, what are you going to do with this?
Probably just fair stuff, honestly. Like, I'm gonna be using this in decks that play a decent amount of lands and plan on casting this when I'm not on the play, or casting this when I've maybe missed a land drop or I'm holding a land drop because I care about ETB effects for lands. But most importantly, what this card can do is it can find cycling lands. It can find the bicycles, which are the lands that we got in Amonkhet. Most importantly, there is an Azorius one, irrigated farmland. It enters the battlefield tapped. It has the land types for the colors, and it gets the cycle. So turning this into drawing other cards is huge, because that's the sort of worry that can come up with card effects like this. And this allows it to be a bit more, it has a bit more utility that way. Also, this is just going to set you up for the rest of the game, usually. Not a lot of decks are looking to cast this card when it would cast this card, which is probably around turn 4 or 5, and then just sit for 3 more turns, except for like the grindiest types of decks. So it can be very helpful there, just giving you all the lands you really need for the rest of the game, as long as you're playing as long as you're playing the lands available that have the dual land types. And I think that's the biggest deal. This doesn't say basic planes, it doesn't say anything like that. So it can help fix your mana sometimes.
And speaking of mana, we can now move on to a really shocking card, Mana Tithe, which is an instant for 1 white mana that says counter target spell unless its controller pays 1. This card is a color shifted version of Force Spike, which is a blue version of this card. And we don't have Force Spike in this format, but now you can just hold up a white mana at pretty much any point in the game where you have cards in hand, and your opponent has to be worried about a potential Mana Tithe.
I'm going to lose to this so often when playing around Swords to Plowshares.
I'm going to lose to this so many times, not because my opponent actually has it, but because I think they have it. And you can be that person, honestly. Like, bluffing a Mana Tithe seems really easy to do in this format, especially when we have a lot of lands that can enter untapped depending on a choice that you make. So if you, say, play a shock land and choose to just pay 2 life, and then at the end of your turn you have this conspicuous 1 white mana open, you probably will see your opponent playing a turn behind.
I also plan on playing this in Azorius Tempo, just playing this in like a blue-white deck, so I can put down a land that can tap for blue and white mana, and it can be like, so which one does it tap? Which one do I have? Do I have Spell Pierce or do I have Mana Tithe? Do I have either? Well,
it's Spell Pierce, Mana Tithe, Opt, or potentially the next card we're going to be talking about, Swords to Plowshares, which is a single white mana for an instant that says exile target creature. Its controller gains life equal to its power. UFO, why don't you tell us about this?
Have you ever had an issue with a creature where it just kind of comes in, nearly killing you? You don't care how much life your opponent gains, you just need it gone. And Swords of Plowshares is, I think, the most efficient way in all of Magic to do so. This is an extremely powerful effect and will weave into almost any sort of play pattern that wants to be removing creatures from the board. I would be very surprised if this doesn't see extremely instant widespread play, where the timings that it enables at the highest level are very impressive, where you're usually needing to be doing stuff with 2 mana on turns 2 and 3, because you have all these 2 mana cantrips. You don't have the 1 mana cantrips that are available in a lot of other formats. And being able to use that extra 1 mana on a thing like Swords of Plowshares or any of these other really powerful 1 mana spells that we've gotten or are going to be talking about later is very important for control. And then I think also aggro is just as happy to see this card as control, because gaining life, while not the best thing for their opponent, is often a fine trade-off for getting rid of the creature that's meaning all of their creatures cannot attack. Like, I am fine to Swords of Plowshares and Elder Gargaroth on white-based aggro.
Yeah, the fact that under normal circumstances, Elder Gargaroth would say, "You can't win the game, my good fellow white and some other color aggro deck." Swords to Plowshares, just 6 life means nothing. And then any amount of life really doesn't mean anything for the control deck, because the control deck doesn't win based off of their opponent's life total. However, the control deck does often need to win based off its own life total, and there's a really good card for making sure that control has a decently padded life total, and that card is Teferi's Protection, which is 2 and a white for an instant that says, until your next turn, your life total can't change, you gain protection from everything, and all permanents you control phase out. And then you exile Teferi's Protection. And hey, look, it's me talking about this card, because this card is a fantastic fog that also happens to dampen a lot of other strategies. This not only allows you to stop removal spells, including board wipes, as any deck, it also lets the control deck say, you can't answer my really problematic threats, your opponents can't Field of Ruin your Azcantas, they can't destroy your lands, they can't destroy your enchantments that have things exiled under them. Teferi's Protection stops removal that would swing the game outside of control's favor, and it also acts as a fog against those aggro decks that tend to be the big problem that control needs to deal with most consistently.
And more importantly, it's a fog that doesn't die to Questing Beast, one of the most played cards in our format. Questing Beast is 2 green for a legendary creature beast. Vigilance, Death Touch, and Haste. Questing Beast cannot be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less. Combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control cannot be prevented. Whenever Questing Beast deals combat damage to an opponent, deal that much damage to target planeswalker that opponent controls. This is also a 4/4. The tax is worth it to mention the card in relation to this one, because it's why fogs have been so low power in, everything due to it.
And Questing Beast isn't the only thing that stops damage
I
prevention.
mean,
Oh no!
Seismic.
Questing Beast is 2 green for a 4/4 legendary creature, type line Beast, with Vigilance, Death Touch, Haste, can't be blocked by creatures with power 2 or less, combat damage that would be dealt by creatures you control can't be prevented, and whenever Questing Beast deals combat damage to a player, it deals that much damage to target planeswalker that opponent controls. There's also another card that stops damage prevention, and that card is Bone Crusher Giant, which is 2 and a red for a 4/3, but more importantly, has an instant that you can cast from your hand, which is Stomp. It's 1 and a red to deal 2 damage to any target, and damage that turn can't be prevented. So we have multiple really highly played cards that stop most fogs from being played in this format, and Teferi's Protection gets around both of them, while also having a lot more versatility in pretty much every matchup that a white deck can face. I think the only deck that might not actively want to play this is a heavy white base aggro deck, but even then, having protection against wraths is not anything to scoff at. So Teferi's Protection is really a card that protects pretty much every white inclusive deck to keep them off of having dangerous removal pointed at them, including combo decks. And one card that's a slam dunk in combo decks is Blue Sun Zenith, which is X blue for an instant that says target player draws X cards, shuffle Blue Sun Zenith into its owner's library. Joker Bunny, how are you going to make this card a slam dunk in combo, whether it likes it or not?
Well, I'm going to tap blue, 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 blue,
This is cease being a ward
blue,
at this point.
blue, blue, blue,
I'm hearing more of Baloo,
God damn it!
the character
Damn
from
it!
the Jungle Book.
I was like, all right, I got to the first interrupt, fine.
Have you tried adding a bit more blue mana to that?
Yeah, so I'm going to tap a bunch of mana, and I'm going to make myself or my opponent, depending on how I feel, draw an excess amount of cards. Just a good amount. There's an upper limit. I could probably make my opponent draw about 1,000 cards before Arena gets upset at me. But what's important is that if I target them, because it says target player, I can kill them without doing damage to them. And while a card like Teferi's Protection prevents them from being targeted, there's still other effects that prevent dying due to damage or dying due to other effects like that. So just giving a non-damage based way to kill my opponent is huge. And while it's going to be a little bit mana intensive, it gets shuffled back into the library, which makes it able to be tutored out later if we need to. So that allows for some other options and maybe some non-green big mana storm decks.
So also, where do we think Blue Sun Zenith Where do we think Blue Sun Zenith falls in, say, a control player's mindset?
Well, if I'm going to cast it, I'm going to tap blue, 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 blue.
No.
And probably like some white mana, I'm fine with this in like a rec deck, honestly. Like, it's not...
I'm very excited for this with Rec. I'm going to have a good time with that.
I have not been very high on Sphinx's Revelation in these various control decks. I think it's just not timed in the right way. And Blue Sun Zenith has the same type of timing, but it has different use, doesn't it?
I think the biggest thing is that it gets shuffled back into the deck. So especially if you're playing like the Is It Rec builds, where you're more focused on your colors, just having a big draw spell like this where you can be like, all right, draw 7 cards because I know that I can interact with whatever they do next or something like that. Just
non-white. I get it. I get that entirely.
Yeah, just only being able to get this off of blue mana is the biggest deal here. So that's what's gonna set it apart from other cards.
I'm very excited to try this out in Paradox decks, because right now Paradox decks, in order to have a draw spell that kills your opponent, are mostly relying on a card called Folio of Fancies, which is 1 and a blue for an artifact that says players have no maximum hand size, as well as X, X, and tap. Each player draws X cards, and 2 and a blue and tap. Each opponent mills cards equal to the number of cards in their hand. That card's bad. And Blue Sun Zenith is a way to turn the infinite mana that you can generate from Paradox into a tangible win without needing to do more Paradox shenanigans.
Yeah, that's very fair.
And speaking of shenanigans and drawing cards, Brainstorm does a lot of that. It's a single blue for an instant that says draw 3 cards, then put 2 cards from your hand on top of your library in any order. Lightning, what do you have to say about this card?
Yeah, no, Brainstorm is... I mean, for people who have played or seen Legacy, Brainstorm is a hell of a card, and it's not going to be as powerful here as it is there for a couple reasons, but it's still very much a card I'm probably playing in most of my blue decks, because we've been lacking a little on 1-mana cantrips. We have Opt, and... well, we have Opt. A lot of our cantrips are 2 mana rather than 1 mana, stuff like Anticipate and Deliberate. But Brainstorm being 1 mana is pretty big. And while unlike 60 card formats, we can't play 10 fetch lands to always have shuffle effects to make this insane card filtering, being able to dig 3 cards deep for 1 mana is still very good, even if you end up having to draw the other 2 cards eventually anyways.
There's also just a lot of incidental shuffling happening within what normal play patterns are for many decks, and more can be added in if one wants to increase their Brainstorm power level, where you already have many decks playing Field of Ruin, especially in the decks that are wanting to play Brainstorm. We do have 3 effective fetches in Evolving Wilds, Terramorphic, and Fabled Passage, which aren't actual fetch lands, but Fabled Passage is arguably much more powerful in many situations.
Yeah, Fabled Passage is in most multicolored decks, I think. And you can... I don't think it's entirely ubiquitous anymore, but you can absolutely still be playing Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse and be doing all right.
Yeah, I think Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse have been played previously for their Revolt trigger, where decks were playing Fatal Push and wanted to have a Revolt trigger.
Also decks playing like Ramonep Excavator and stuff.
Exactly. But now we have further use for that interaction in those cards. Brainstorm might bring those back into the tap land slot of a deck.
Yeah, this specifically with Brainstorm is definitely making me put Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse back into Blue-Black Tempo, which we talked about before.
And I'm working on bringing those cards into Blue-Black Control for very similar reasons.
Also, there's additional utility that we haven't talked about yet. And obviously, this isn't going to come up as much in a 100-card format, but Brainstorm has some very powerful interactions with cards that trigger on drawing a card. There are certain effects that just say, whenever you draw a card, do a thing. And this draws 3 cards. No matter what else happens, this still just draws 3 cards.
Yeah, we also have, we have stuff that says whenever you draw a card. We have, I think, multiple sets on Arena that have had themes of whenever you draw your second card a turn. And normally that's easier to do on your turn, but Brainstorm lets you do it on either player's turn for 1 mana. Also, I want to Bolus a Citadel with this.
Oh.
Yeah. The other thing that this does that I'm really excited for is in specifically emergent ultimatum decks, you get to put back pieces that you want to emergent for that are stranded in hand, and then either cast your emergent or shuffle them back in so when you find your emergent, they're not terrible.
On the note of Bolus's Citadel, there are a good number of effects that care about the top card of the library in some way, whether those effects are generating effective advantage, like cards that let you cast specific kinds of spells or play lands off the top of your library, or cards that just look at the top X number of cards in your library and do something with those cards. Like Genesis Ultimatum, which is a 7-mana sorcery that essentially you get to put the top 5 cards of your library, if they're permanents, onto the battlefield, and if they're not, into your hand. And so this lets you put dumb stuff into the top of your deck so that you can put that stuff onto the battlefield immediately after.
Man, you all wanted to mention much cooler interactions than I was going to mention. I was just going to talk about God Eternal Kefnet and how you get to put the top card of your library as whatever you want and perhaps put some extra turn spells on top of your deck. It's like, yeah, that's pretty cool, but you guys went a lot spicier than I was going to go.
I don't think we did.
We'll talk about Kefnet later. I have plans.
Is there a way to actually make that a loop?
You have to loop the Brainstorm, but yes. We can talk a bit later about that. I'm not entirely sure where this is going, but if we put a Time Walk on top and we put a Regrowth as the second card, there might be something.
Yeah, there might be shenanigans here.
And
talking about shenanigans,
I mean, there's less shenanigans to do with this next card, but it is very similar to the text of Brainstorm, and that's Compulsive Research, which is 2 and a blue for a sorcery that says target player draws 3 cards, then that player discards 2 cards unless they discard a land card. This card is pretty interesting because it is one of the many different 3 mana draw 3 cards, then discard 2 or a specific kind of card. This is the first one where we get to discard a land card, and oftentimes with these kinds of effects, I'm playing them mainly so that I can draw 3 cards and then discard 2 lands that I wasn't going to be doing anything with. And Compulsive Research allows you to make those cards into draw 2s, which means I think that Compulsive Research might get in over some of the more specific versions of its effect across the Arena card pool.
Also, just playing Compulsive Research means you get to play 1 less card in your deck that says Thirst, and that's just better for everyone.
Fair. The Thirsts, though, do have a speed advantage, though.
Yeah, Compulsive Research being a sorcery is rough.
But Compulsive Research gets hit off of Collective Conjuring.
I mean,
that doesn't make it better.
That doesn't help.
If anything, I'd say that makes it worse.
I know you're gonna make it work, Joker, but
I'm trying.
I think the more important part of compulsive research for your state, Joker, is target player.
Yes.
Also for anyone else, honestly, because have you ever thought about compulsive researching your opponent while you would Narset out?
Yes.
Oh, I have now.
Yeah, that's a real thing you can do.
I was gonna meme about Waste Not, but that's actually good.
Another terrible idea I had is that you might be able to, for timed matches, get your opponent to spend a lot of their chess clock time discarding cards if you're on 1,000-Year Storm.
Satire.
I
I think Thousand Year Storm actually does one compulsive research though for that purpose, where it functions as a dig spell, but also is a thing that if you copy a bunch of times will win you the game.
Yeah, 100%. Just like the more cards that allow it to
Not run dedicated win conditions.
Yeah. Just because as you've known before, and as I've mentioned on this podcast before, I have a bit of a history with a certain right. And I put it in just because people complained about there not being win conditions. And now I'm going to tell them that compulsive research is my win condition. And if they complain, I'll make them draw their deck and we'll see what happens.
Wait, does that mean you're going to be cutting
No.
1,000?
No. Don't worry.
I mean, that's their brand.
Now we're still on the 100 coin card special.
I've got to keep my brand up at this point. I would have cut it a long time ago.
We're not second right productions for nothing.
Notably, this lets you discard your second right,
True.
which is not nothing.
More importantly, just discarding cards that you put in for specific matchups. Like, there are cards that you put in to beat control, per se. Much like cards like the next one, right?
Yeah, the next card is definitely a card for and against control matchups, and that's Counterspell. Blue instant for 3 words of card text that are so tasty. Counter target spell. UFO, tell us about this one.
So I've talked a lot about timing already, and timing is key for this one. Counterspell being 2 mana to counter anything, absolutely anything you can imagine, is very, very powerful. And one might look at a card like Cancel and realize that Cancel is terrible. Why does a spell that is 1 mana less do so much more? Well, the answer again is timing. The fact that you're able to use this with 2 mana as opposed to 3 means that you're going to be able to slip in so much more in the early stages of the game when your mana efficiency matters the most. As the game goes longer, mana efficiency stops mattering in some cases, but it will always matter in the first few turns of the game. And being able to counterspell things on 2, or use a counterspell and a Brainstorm, or a counterspell and a Swords of Plowshares to really control the early game as a control deck is beyond important. I'm not too personally impressed with this card, as it is not easy to cast in more than, say, a 2-color list, and I'm sure people are going to be playing it where it might not always come down on 2 mana, so it's not always going to shine the best. But when you are using Counterspell as a very cheap way to make your timings work well as a deck, that is where it will shine.
Is that hand on a mountain, or is that hand just in a very puffy sleeve?
¿Por qué no los dos?
How gay are those sleeves?
Puffy Mountain.
I'm pretty sure it is on a natural landscape. I'm pretty sure that's the top
I
of a
feel
mountain.
bad for that hand then. Like, that's also just a very big hand.
Yeah, it's...
You know what they say about big hands?
What?
What?
I don't know what they say about big
You
hands.
need to pay more for
You want
specialized gloves? I don't know.
Big counter spells? Much like this next card, isn't that right, Seismic?
Speaking of counterspells that cost 2 mana, Memory Lapse is 1 and a blue for an instant that says counter target spell. If that spell is countered this way, put it on top of its owner's library instead of into that player's graveyard. Now, Joker Boney, why don't you tell us about this one?
Alright, so you know all those great things we said about counterspell? What if you could cast it in decks that you don't always have double blue onto? Now, what if we also added the utility that they have to then draw this card again to get access to it? Now, that's not going to seem like it matters because it goes right on top of their library, but we mentioned effects earlier that force our opponent to shuffle their library, like Field of Ruin. which is going to give this card some interesting utility as long as you're careful when you use it or you know what effects are in your deck or your opponent's deck. Even just playing certain cards that either force a draw and discard if they only have one card in hand, and this was the card that you memory lapsed, being able to force your opponent to not get that spell back is going to be a huge deal. And even if they get it back, that's a whole turn later. Usually, the decks that are going to be playing this are either decks where they're not getting another turn. Like, this is really good for combo decks just because it's a hard counter that's easy on mana. And it's also really good in tempo because that deck is really just trying to push back on mana, essentially. Just trying to make mana as hard as possible to use well. And Memory Lapse just continues to push that home because you turn their turn 3 play into their turn 4 play, or turn their turn 4 play into their turn 5 play. And sometimes that's the difference between them wrathing on curve or using an instant speed draw spell into drawing that for turn and having the same other cards that they had in hand. It can really screw up what your opponent's game plan is, especially if you're playing against a more controlling list or just a list that depends on casting a bunch of spells to create that sort of card velocity that allows it to win the game.
As I've said many times before, timing is key, and Memory Lapse is both cheap in your timings and messes up your opponent's timings.
Memory Lapse also gives you essentially perfect information on what your opponent is both drawing next turn and also likely to play next turn, meaning if you are, say, holding up a Disdainful Stroke in your hand, you know exactly if you can use it next turn, or if you want to put it away with, say, a Brainstorm or a Compulsive Research.
Yeah, it just gives so much flexibility, just continuing to create that sort of delta of advantage.
Speaking of a delta of advantage, Mind's Desire is 4 blue for a sorcery that says, shuffle your library, then exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. And it also has Storm, which says, when you cast this spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn. This card is really key for decks that just dump their hand in one turn in order to create a huge delta in advantage that makes the board state between each board look like completely separate games. Mind's Desire is a card that usually will allow you to play a huge variety of cards from your deck, and we also have a lot of cards in this format that can cast or return Mind's Desire to your hand in some way. Meaning if you are playing Mind's Desire and off of the top you exile, a card like Scholar of the Lost Trove, which is 5 blue for a 5/5 flying sphinx, that when it enters the battlefield, you may cast a target instant, sorcery, or artifact card from your graveyard without paying its mana cost, and if an instant or sorcery spell cast this way would be put into your graveyard this turn, exile it instead. Cards like Scholar of the Lost Trove are both really good things to cheat on mana with for Mind's Desire, and also can recast Mind's Desire, allowing you to just keep going with this huge cavalcade of board advantage that will either kill your opponent or make sure that they're going to die in the next turn.
See, I was really hoping with where you're going with this, you were going to say a large cavalcade because you're going to try and pitch us for Caltech.
I mean, no.
No.
I don't think that Caltech wants this kind of effect for many reasons.
Unfortunately not.
I mean, there's a universe in which we play it because technically you can win with it after one spell cast, but also no.
I just wanted to say cavalcade on a podcast.
It's not going to happen.
You know, it's also not going to happen. Casting Tezzeret's Gambit for blue mana.
I thought we were giving the segues seismic this time.
We were, but that just hit the moment.
Oh.
I thought you were just going to stop at casting Tezzeret's Gambit. And I mean
that also works.
We'll let UFO be the judge of that one. Tezzeret's Gambit is 3 and a Phyrexian blue mana. That Phyrexian blue can either be paid with blue or 2 life. It's a sorcery, and it reads, draw 2 cards, then proliferate, which is choosing any number of permanents and or players, and then giving each of them another counter of each kind they already have. UFO, why don't we talk about this?
So there are some effects like this in Magic already. Say, Foreboding Fruit or Read the Bones, where you're paying 3 mana and a little bit of life for draw 2 cards and an effect. I think Tezzeret's Gambit is better than any of them. Doesn't require any mana of any specific type, and can fit into a lot of different decks that don't always have access to this sort of burst card draw that one might need, especially in, say, green-white, where you're going to have a bit of extra mana often from your mana-producing creatures, as well as several cards that just kind of do things with counters because that's the identity of those colors. Proliferate is a effect that is very powerful, but can't be really focused on specifically. So having it as sort of a side grade in a card that is already going to be pretty good for these decks that don't already have very much access to card advantage is going to be very nice. I don't think you really are looking to play Tezzeret's Gambit in a deck with blue, but the decks without blue are going to love the option of paying 3 mana to draw 2 cards, because many of them are already paying more effects for 2 cards than what Tezzeret's Gambit offers.
Yeah, I'm very excited to play this in Naya Prison, just because of how many planeswalkers that list plays and how many other effects that care about counters that list plays. And just being able to I've played some interesting cards to get any sort of card advantage in that deck before, and yeah, as said, like, it just gets to draw cards. I don't really care about paying the 2 life, and if I get to be like, this planeswalker that's going to win me the game now gets to ult a little faster, or hey, that creature that had a -1/-1 counter on it for whatever reason from another effect now gets closer to dying, or just whatever. Like, there's going to be a lot of things that this card's going to do that it's not going to be immediately obvious that it can do it, and then you're just going to be like, oh, cool. I also plan on casting this when my opponent plays 9 lives in their deck to put a counter on it and to see what happens with that.
I do want to say there is a downside to playing this card, and that downside is that it causes my white decks to show a blue pip on them in the deck box's screen of Arena.
True.
Yeah.
Also makes a deck that otherwise wouldn't be hit by Mystical Dispute hit by Mystical Dispute.
Oh god.
Oh, that's an actual downside.
Yes.
Huh.
This gets hit by yeah, alright. Speaking of other cards that
It's
get
not-
hit by...
Speaking of
It's not always
Good
gonna
old
come up,
Eldraine.
but like
I
Joker,
know,
this isn't
I'm
your turn.
a joke. I'm making a joke.
Joker Boney, I will throw you into the sun. Anyway, speaking of cards that have no downside, Time Warp is 3 blue for a sorcery that reads, target player takes an extra turn after this one. Lightning, why don't you tell us about this single sentence?
I think there is a downside in that I'm only going to be playing this until the end of time, which will take quite a while because I'll be playing Time Warp. I really do love extra turn effects. I played a lot of Nexus of Fate back when that was legal. I still miss it. But anyways.
I don't know why that got me so good, where it's like, I still miss it.
But yeah, Time Warp is... We have a couple of these already. The main one is Alrund's Epiphany, which is 5 blue for a sorcery that reads, take an extra turn after this one, and you also get 2 birds. And right, yeah, that one exiles itself. Time Warp does not. Alrund's Epiphany also has Foretell for 6 mana, which is somewhat relevant, but Time Warp does not exile itself. Time Warp goes into the graveyard, and all other turn effects we have currently exile themselves. And this is going to allow for a few more shenanigans. We have a decent number of regrowth effects you can play. Cards like Tameo, cards like Balaget Recovery, cards like Mystic Sanctuary, which hasn't really found a home in this format yet.
Hey, I take offense to that.
the statement stands.
I mean,
I've only ever seen Mystic Sanctuary shoved
yeah.
as a bad include into decks that have too few islands.
That-
yeah.
Hey,
Tamer 1,000-Year Storm has been playing it, and it's been good in that deck. But it's also doing shenanigans.
I mean, fair.
But also running more islands.
there is a home for Mystic Sanctuary, but it's not 1,000-Year Storm.
Is it Treasure
It's
Hunt?
Zombie Hunt, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is true.
I mean,
No,
I guess.
that's actually fair.
What was I going to say? Mystic Sank, right? Cards like Mystic Sanctuary, which has had some niche homes over the course of the format, but hasn't really shown up in large numbers because we either don't really have the spells to recur off of it. Well, either because the spells you can recur off of it are not desirable enough to be playing a bad island, or because you aren't running enough islands to consistently make it work. But Time Warp Mystic Sanctuary is going to allow me to play Kefnet the Mindful again. And I absolutely should not be doing that. Kefnet the Mindful is 2 blue for a 5/5 legendary god that has flying and indestructible. And Kefnet the Mindful can't attack or block unless you have 7 or more cards in hand. That is not a good line of text, but we live with it. Because the next line is 3 and a blue, where you draw a card, and then may return a land you control to your hand. And this, notably, does some fun things with Mystic Sanctuary, where now we can spend 9 mana, 4 of it on Kefnet's ability, and 5 of it on Time Warp, and take infinite turns.
Lightning, I don't know whether to love you or hate you right now. You made me enjoy the concept of Kefnet the Mindful.
Yeah, I don't know why this is the card I have chosen to die on the hill of, but it's a fun one.
For the low cost of 9 mana a turn, you can take every turn.
Hey,
That still wins the game.
I mean, I've gotten there relatively easy in the blue-green turns decks.
So you have Kefnet, which is a giant flying creature.
it's a giant flying ibis.
What else are giant flying creatures?
Oh,
Dragons. And what's our next card? Crux of Fate, which is 3 black for a sorcery that says choose one. Destroy all dragon creatures or destroy all non-dragon creatures. UFO, tell us about this one.
so I started Magic in Fate Reforged, which is where this card was originally printed. And I've got a bit of a love for this effect specifically, but more generally, I've just been wanting more non-white hard wraths for a while. And I know Crux of Fate doesn't kill every creature every time. Sometimes there'll be a dragon left behind, or vice versa. But it is the closest to another unconditional wrath we've gotten since Blood on the Snow. Back a few months ago, when we were talking about switching over to non-white decks with wraths in them, I mentioned Crux of Fate as probably the best wrath we were going to be getting for the next several years in black. And then they surprised me with putting an actual unconditional wrath in black, which is not currently what they've been doing up until Kaldheim. Having the ability to destroy everything without having to jump through any other hoops is very powerful for decks that aren't wanting to be running white for mana reasons.
And then sometimes you just absolutely ruin the Dragon's Tribal player.
Yes, and then sometimes that happens, or sometimes your Dragon's Tribal and you get to absolutely ruin someone else.
Or sometimes your opponent is playing, or you are playing, one incidental dragon, and you either win or lose based off of who is controlling that one incidental dragon.
Everyone gets reminded about what changelings people play as soon as you cast Crux of Fate.
Oh, right.
True.
Good old Faceless Haven. Actually, wait, that doesn't really matter.
No, but I think it matters just about as much as the Giant Wrath, the one that only cares about non-giants.
Yeah, the Cast-Off, which is the adventure side of
Realm Cloaked Giant.
Rarely do I remember an adventure's name, but forget the actual card.
I had forgotten all of them.
The only reason I remember Cast Off is because it's in the series of a bunch of cards that are cast and then something else, like Cast Down and Cast Out. And it's just...
I was going to say Shake Off, and then I started singing Shake It Off.
Ah!
Oh no, it's in my head now.
Everyone hated that.
Oh, I love that. Other cards that I love include Dark Ritual, which is a single black for an instant that says add black. This card is pretty busted. The fact that it lets you, play old magic cards at 3 mana, namely Hypnotic Spectre, which is 1 black for a 2/2 Spectre that has flying, and whenever it hits a player, that player discards a card. I believe, at random.
Mhm.
And so Dark Ritual gets us one step closer to being able to build a deck entirely built around the 90s. However, Dark Ritual is also just a fairly good card for accelerating Black Aggro's game plan and playing large threats earlier than they should realistically be played in a normal game of Gladiator.
Yeah, it's 2021, old person. We're gonna play a turn 1 Rotting Regisaur. Ah!
Wow.
Turn 1 Rotting Regisaur, I'm genuinely excited to see someone else play. I think I'm too scared to play that.
I'm going to be excited for it until I realize it's going to happen to me.
What I'm excited to do is use this Dark Ritual to cast 4-drops on turn 2,
Mhm.
like Rankle, Master of Pranks, which is
Or Phyrexian Obliterator.
or Phyrexian Obliterator. That sweet quad black mana never looked so easy.
And since I interrupted them, I'll go ahead and explain Rankle. Rankle is a 4-mana 3/3 flying haste fairy rogue. So look at that face. Look at that face. Look at that face.
He's great.
And whenever it hits your opponent, you get to choose any amount of these 3 modes. Each player discards a card. Each player loses 1 life and draws a card. Each player sacrifices a creature. The sacrifice is on top, which does matter. My apologies. But this card is very good. It's good on 4, it's good on 3, it's even better on 2. And Phyrexian Obliterator is black, 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 black for a 5/5 with trample, and whenever Phyrexian Obliterator is dealt damage, the player that dealt that damage sacrifices that many permanents.
This card does a lot of work, and it will lead to some amount of non-games of Magic, but I think more often a lot of games of extremely funny Magic, where your opponent isn't getting literal, like, game-ending cards on turn 1 or 2 or 3, but they are getting really powerful and really funny plays to be making that early in a game of Magic the Gathering.
So, Seismic, can I introduce you to the turn 3 Bolas' Citadel?
I know it well. I haven't played it, but I really am it's
Yes.
beautiful.
Yes.
Speaking of cards that are beautiful, Demonic Tutor is 1 and a black for a sorcery that says search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle. And wow, both of the arts for this are just really, really pretty. And Lightning, why don't you tell us about what the card actually does?
I mean, Demonic Tutor is arguably the best tutor. It's definitely the most iconic, I think, in like the category of cards that search your library for something. And I mean, it's very good at what it does. There's a reason it's so well known. It's 2 mana for the best card in your deck. And I expect this to go in not every black deck, but definitely a large percentage of them, both for doing fair and unfair things. Like, you are able to just grab whatever 4-drop you want to be playing on curve, or find that extra piece of removal you need to deal with this thing that's going to kill you now, or grab an Underworld Breach and do some weird nonsense.
I'm gonna cast it off Collected Conjuring.
I know you're going to try. Demonic Tutor is kind of just as good as your most efficient card. So now that we're getting all these extra really efficient answers and proactive things, being able to Demonic Tutor into them is quite good.
It's definitely a card that you can just tutor out any cheap answer and it becomes a good play generically, or it can be used as a way to just have an extra 2 mana for an extra copy of your win conditions. And even more notably is the classic play of Demonic Tutor being 2 mana to search your library for a land, because sometimes you're going to need a land and you're going to be more than okay with paying 2 mana for it. Or you should be okay with paying 2 mana for that land in cases where you might not be, because that's not only a real application of this card. I think we're going to be seeing more people using Demonic Tutor to find cheap answers and lands than we are going to see Demonic Tutor looking for a literal actual way to immediately win the game.
Or just like a wrath for the next turn or that turn.
Yeah.
Just an answer for what's currently on the board as opposed to a way to make the board unanswerable.
One of those answers for things that are on the board includes Doomblade, which is 1 and a black for an instant that says destroy target non-black creature. This card is, I'd say, really strong, at least where decks are pointing towards right now. We aren't seeing too many black creatures hitting the table, and while there are some matchups where Doomblade might just be useless or might be close to useless, Doomblade is, for the most part, going to be another 2-mana removal spell for a creature that you need to kill. It's not unconditional because there are a lot of good black creatures that do see some amount of play, but in general, as long as other colors are being played more than black in terms of creature decks, whether that be mid-range or aggro decks, Doomblade's going to be doing pretty well.
There's a reason the basis for whether or not a creature is good is it dies to Doomblade.
Erroneously or otherwise.
Oh yeah, it's usually used in bad faith, but still.
Yeah, and this is a discussion that came up on the server, and I feel like it's worth mentioning. People talk about what this actually hits versus other cards, versus something like, let's say, Cast Down, just for the point of comparison. Cast Down can hit any non-legendary creature. And when you think on a base part, you can probably think of a lot of black creatures before you can think of a lot of legendary creatures. Just going through and thinking about stuff that you'd like to hit with a removal spell. But as it turns out, Doomblade it's just so much better to be able to hit everything in every other color than it is missing out on some very potent effects that can kill you really fast.
Yeah, especially considering that usually the legendary creatures that are being played because they're very powerful.
Yeah. And on top of this, there is the benefit that this can still hit some cards in mono black. Not always going to hit some stuff, but like it can hit cards that I've seen play like Stonecoil Serpent, which is importantly a colorless creature that is very good.
Yeah, this Doomblade hits a lot of things and has a lot of relevance in the format. Another card that also answers a lot of different potential threats is Inquisition of Kozilek, which is a single black for a sorcery that reads, target player reveals their hand. You choose a non-land card from it with mana value 3 or less, and that player discards that card. UFO, why don't you tell us more?
Inquisition Kozilek is one of the better hand attack spells we've gotten in Magic for a very long time. And hand attack is being used most often in our format to sort of disrupt the early game plays of various decks. Against aggro, you want to take their 2 or 3 drop to stop them from curving out in the way that they wanted to when they kept the hand that they kept. There are decks that are looking to play, say, 2 green dorks. There are decks that are looking to play various other things to set up on turns 2 and 3, and Inquisition will really help you in the early game for doing that. And now with all these really very efficient cards coming in from the archive and just also being present in the format already, Inquisition is still going to be very impactful into the late game as a way to fight for, say, that counterspell that's being held up, whether actual factual counterspell or, say, a disallow, where CMC 3 or less, or mana value as it's being changed to this set, is one of the most important parts of a Gladiator deck.
Notably, this Inquisition of Kozilek is pretty undoubtedly the best way to get rid of a counterspell, because almost every counterspell, or at the very least every high quality counterspell that you generally want to be running in a deck, is going to be mana value 3 or less. Inquisition of Kozilek kind of stops your opponent from having useful counter magic up, or at least from playing perfectly with that counter magic up, and it usually eats at least one counter spell. One thing that Inquisition of Kozilek can hit is our next card, Sign in Blood, which for black is a sorcery that reads target player draws 2 cards and loses 2 life. Joker Bunny, why don't you tell us more?
Oh boy, let's go. This card is amazing. Also it's just nice. We talked earlier when we were talking about Tezzeret's Gambit, how people have been playing Read the Bones and other effects like it before, just to have some card velocity. Save us, Sign in Blood. We are free. We get to play good costed draw spells in black. This is only going to come up in the more controlling versions of lists, so we're going to see this in mono black control, and then also lists like the Rock, which is a green black control list. Just having access to card velocity that's cheap, especially when it's taxing your life total in black, is just good. And the 3 mana versions are just not the same. Like we talked about earlier with Counterspell, just the timing on it, and especially with these later in the game, being able to play these on like turn 5 and then follow up with a 3 mana removal spell or 3 mana threat. It's so different from having a 3 mana draw spell, even if this one's harder on the mana. Also, you can target your opponent if that ever is important. I've definitely killed someone by targeting them with this, either to make them draw cards or lose life.
We can count this as another win con in Thousand Year Storm if we wanted to, but
No, it loses life. I respect entirely, but if I played this card in Thousand Year Storm, I would die.
But Joker Boney, you only need to copy it 10 times to win with it.
Oh,
Sorry, you need to copy it 9 times. You need to have 10 copies. Speaking of cards that work in decks that are built very specifically, Tainted Pact is 1 and a black for an instant that says, exile the top card of your library. You may put that card into your hand unless it has the same name as another card exiled this way. Repeat this process until you put a card into your hand, or you exile 2 cards with the same name, whichever comes first. Lightning, take us home. Well, don't take us home. Lightning, tell us more.
yeah, so Tainted Pact is a weird one. It's an old card that kind of needs a couple reads to make sure you understand it. But the gist of it is that if you don't have any duplicates in your deck, which is a thing we mostly do anyways in Gladiator, you can exile cards from the top of your library until you find the one you want. But Demonic Tutor, this is not. There are 2 major downsides here, I think. The cards that get exiled remain in exile, which means you can just go through like a bunch of your deck out of nowhere if you're digging for a very specific answer. And I will absolutely kill myself to Tainted Pacting down to 3 cards at some point. I know that's going to happen. Additionally, the singleton requirement will, with this, extend to basic lands. And while I think it's possible for a 3-color deck, probably second downside is that this does require you to play a lot less basics, because hitting 2 basic lands with the same name is still going to cause you to not get anything off of Tainted Pact. Now, we do have the snow-covered lands, which will serve as a second basic for each of your colors. But even then, for a 3-color deck, that's still only 6 basics.
and while that's manageable for some lists, just because of the density of weird dual lands we have, it's still a real cost. And if this card isn't doing some ridiculous stuff, I'm going to be honest, it's probably not entirely worth it.
Especially considering that if you build your mana base in such a way that you have the unique cards to make it work, you're going to be seeing the effects of those extra tap lands much more often than you're going to be seeing Tainted Pact. So Tainted Pact better be doing a lot for you, because you're going to be seeing its effect much more often as a negative.
Yeah, you're definitely paying a real cost for actually restricting your mana base by playing Tainted Pact.
But it can just win you the game if you pair this with a card called Thessa's Oracle. The important part here is that Thessa's Oracle wins you the game if you have an empty library, or if you meet another requirement. But most importantly, you've probably seen this in other formats already, but these 2 cards create win the game if you can meet the conditions. Obviously, it can still be interacted with, but it's worth mentioning that this is pretty close to the first A plus B combo that this format has.
They both require to be in hand, and when combined, they can win the game. Neither is guaranteed, and honestly, there's a lot of Stifles being played right now, and that combo dies to Stifle exclusively. Disallow, Tail's End, Nimble Obstructionist Cycle, all of those will stop it.
It also dies to target player draws a card at instant speed, which is less prevalent, but people are still going to die to that.
We did just get Blue Sun Zenith.
I'm not trying to sell it as this is going to be some ridiculous card. I just think that because people are going to talk about it, and because it's a thing that's going to come up a lot, it is worth saying that this is the first time that Gladiator has had a true A plus B combo. There are some like stretching 3-card combos and some 4-card combos and some more mana intensive 2-card combos, but this is the first one where it's like I've played a 2-mana spell and I get to win with this other 2-mana spell. And that's new. It'll be interesting to see what people do with it.
We'll see how it shakes out. I think that people are going to overestimate how much the cost is of playing all these tap lands. I think to make a deck like this function faster, you need to be adding more colors of lands so you have untapped lands in those colors, and that reduces your consistency of hitting these colors quickly or casting your spells at all. There's this really interesting tug of war between your mana base and what you actually want to be playing when you're playing Tainted Pact.
It's definitely going to pique the interest of a lot of combo deck builders, and it has a pretty alluring potential to it that might not always happen. A pretty similar card in that regard is Tendrils of Agony. Tendrils of Agony is 2 black for a sorcery that reads, target player loses 2 life and you gain 2 life, and also has Storm, so it copies itself for each spell cast before it this turn.
Hi! Storm! No. Just... Alright, so this has caused a lot of discussion in the Gladiator Discord and just in the community in general, just talking about what this card could do. And a lot of people have been talking about its potential to do things similar to what other formats have been able to do with it. And I want to be the person that's going to come out here and say, while being a very big person that plays Storm and being very involved in like what Storm can do in this format, I'm going to be the person that says that trying to play this to play a Storm list like other decks in other formats is not good. It's not going to work in its capacity with something like Underworld Breach, which, for the relevance of talking about it here, allows you to cast cards from the graveyard as long as you meet some conditions. And we don't have the effects that allow it to be wholly broken or to allow it to be wholly a strong combo deck in that sort of sense, because we don't have the redundancy that lets those decks work that way. Now, am I going to play this in Thousand Year Storm? 100%. But I think the people clamoring to the idea that it can be played as a sort of Breach Storm list that we've seen in other formats, there's going to be some disappointment there just because we don't have the rituals. We have an ritual. We have maybe 2 rituals that go mana neutral that don't have restrictions on how you play the game after it or on how it can be spent. So I love that we are getting these Storm cards. I'm going to do some ridiculous things with these Storm cards, but from one of the people that's been playing Storm since this format has begun, please temper expectations on turning these cards on Arena into having this amazing Storm list like you've played in Modern or in Legacy or in Canadian Highlander or in Commander or anything like that, because it's not the same. We don't have the cards the same way. We don't have the effects that make it work the same.
Now, there is actually a place where you can make it work pretty similarly, though, and that's when you're playing a Bolas' Citadel deck. Bolas' Citadel loves this card.
Yes, but yes.
And it's very different. It's very different from the traditional uses in, say, Legacy, where in other formats, what you're doing is you're padding your Storm count up by cards that draw cards but don't cost mana and increase your Storm count. And we don't have those. We don't really have more than the 1 ritual, so we're not getting that extra Storm count padding without other setup. And once you have other setup happening, Tendrils of Agony just becomes so much less impactful in the game. Like, once you're making infinite mana, why are you trying to win with the Tendrils?
I mean, that's a longer discussion. But I will say that in the sort of Bolas' Citadels decks that could start playing this, that it'll be very interesting, and it'll be curious to see how far people go just trying to make it work, or just, hoping to hit it off the top.
I am ready to see all of the very strangely and uniquely built, I'd say very personally built combo decks coming from the Mystical Archive.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of interesting combos, especially coming with cards we'll get to when we talk about Strixhaven as well. But my main point with getting across with this is that while there will be different types of Storm decks popping up in Gladiator because of this, they like everything in Gladiator, and this is a point that people, still to an extent don't really acknowledge as much, is that it's going to look a lot different here than it does in other formats.
Oh yeah, trying to compare decks between Gladiator and other formats is always chaos.
I really like how specifically with this in Bolas's Citadel and other decks that use their life as a resource for a lot of the game is that Tendrils of Agony doesn't need to be Storm Count 10 in order to win the game. You can just use this to pad out your own life total and keep doing dumb stuff. One thing that stops you from all of this dumb stuff that you could do is removal. Removal like Chaos Warp, which is 2 in a red for an instant, where the owner of target permanent shuffles it into their library, then reveals the top card of their library. If it's a permanent card, they put it onto the battlefield. This card is a very good way for red to deal with anything, including cards that it couldn't deal with before or had a very hard time dealing with before. I know that we've all had the dismay of being an aggro deck against an Elder Gargaroth or against a Galta that was just too big for damage-based removal to easily kill it, and also too impactful in the game that we could just ignore it. Chaos Warp changes that and allows for any red deck to have an answer to most permanents that could hit the table. And that allows for a lot of deck building decisions that we wouldn't be able to make before, because we can say now, I don't need to worry about always having 2 different removal spells up to kill a Gargaroth, because I actually have cards that can single-handedly deal with one at this point. And while the downside of Chaos Warp returning something might be real, it oftentimes isn't too real, and the amount of times where your opponent will have an increase of mana is likely lower than the amount of times where they'll have either a decrease in mana value or won't get anything back at all.
I would like to mention that UFO was trying to set up a perfectly catered segue, and then Seismic was just like...
Yeah, I want to talk about Tendrils of Agony more. I'm so focused on talking about Tendrils of Agony more. I didn't hear that the sentence that was thrown to me literally ended with the word chaos.
Look, I'm here for long-winded segues. I'm not here for good ones.
I understand entirely. I'm more than here for it. I love it. I just thought it was very funny. It was like, I see what UFO is doing here, and then Seismic starts talking about tendrils more. I'm like, yes.
I don't pick up on that kind of thing.
Oh, did you not actually pick up on it?
No, I didn't. I had no idea.
Oh no. Yeah, no, UFO ended with chaos, and I was like, ooh, alright, let's see if Seismic tries to, robot, and it's like, no, we're just going on the 7 layers of Kevin Bacon here.
Storm count is 7 layers of bacon.
And so is Chaos Warp.
Yeah.
Yeah, Chaos Warp is a bit of a weird one. I'm not entirely sure how much play it's gonna see. It can be problematic just because of its effect on the game. As mentioned before, even though it doesn't have a high likelihood of giving your opponent something game-winning, there is a chance that you just give them something even worse for you, or, just because they get shuffled back in, there is a chance that they just get that thing back.
Yeah, it's not always very consistent in being an answer, but it's an answer, and a color that doesn't usually get to answer permanents of the type that it can answer.
Yeah. This does allow me to answer enchantments in blue-red, which is a thing I've kind of been needing. I might probably just be better off playing more Blink of an Eyes, but this card does do some interesting stuff.
I will say there is a very interesting part of this, which is if you are playing red and white together, you could also play an effect like Containment Priest, which if a creature would enter from not being cast, it gets exiled instead. And while this is obviously not going to stop everything that Chaos Warp can do, it's worth mentioning. If you're in a Boros deck, which now, mind you, it has a lot of ways to answer a lot of permanents, actually. But sometimes you just need to get rid of their Planeswalker or a Gargaroth, as mentioned before. Being able to get rid of it, and then they flip a creature. That's not a May there, by the way. It'll make them try to put the creature into play, and the creature just goes away forever, which can be even better for you sometimes.
And if it's not a permanent, then the card stays on top of their deck, which means in certain cases you can use that as perfect information for what your opponent's going to have access to next turn. And additionally, if they don't reveal a permanent, they get nothing out of it, and you just used Chaos Warp as a complete vindicate.
Yeah, as a remove it so hard that it can't even be gotten out of your graveyard. It is now shuffled into your 100 card deck. And now I also get to know the top card of your library.
One other notable corner case of this is that it deals with the God Eternals fairly well, because the God Eternals put themselves back into their library third from the top whenever they're exiled or when they die. Chaos Warp does neither, and for most decks that are playing these God Eternals, having access to those cards repeatedly is a huge boon to them, and Chaos Warp ignores that text.
Yeah, Chaos Warp is good on God Eternals, both when actually answering them specifically and when they've already been dealt with and are back in the top of the library.
Yeah, also can shuffle them away.
Yep.
Just it's not going to be the best answer. It's probably never going to be the best answer, but it's a very interesting answer, and it does stuff that red doesn't get to do, especially in this format. So it's definitely worth keeping an eye on, especially if you're in a color combination that just can't answer certain permanents, or just in the color that can't answer certain permanents.
Or a color combination that needs to shuffle their own library after a brainstorm.
That as well. There is something to be said about using this in some decks where sometimes you're like, well, I don't know what I need, but I need something. Target a land you don't need anymore. It's like, oh, I flipped a Niv Mizzet. Thanks.
Yeah, very random.
That desperation line has saved me in games of Commander before, and I'm willing to bet it will save some people in Gladiator, just due to the fact that their general permanent count is better than their lands.
Mm-hmm.
And additional things that red doesn't usually get to do, but gets to do with the Mystical Archive, includes Faithless Looting, which is a single red for a sorcery that says draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. And also flashes back for 2 and a red, which lets you cast it from the graveyard for its flashback cost and then exile it. UFO, why don't you tell us more?
Card selection in red is rare, and Faithless Looting is probably the best version of this effect that they've ever printed, period.
Pretty close.
Yeah, it's up there.
I'm pretty sure I'm comfortable saying that. Where the first half of the card is technically card disadvantage, right? You're not drawing any more cards than you're losing. So you're losing Faithless Looting, and then you're also losing 2 more cards from your hand to find 2 cards that are correct for your hand. But once that happens, first of all, you've selected the best cards of the ones that were on top of your library. You can then flash it back with no extra cost of cards from your hand to then do it again. The amount of power that being able to just do this really efficient selection of cards will be impactful across most versions of red in Gladiator, where there's some decks that care about cards in graveyard and they'll be even better there. But even when you're not caring about many cards in your graveyard, Gladiator still does have a lot of benefit in most decks and most times having cards in graveyard. We've talked about various Phoenixes, Arclight Phoenix being another one that this starts to enable, as well as...
How had I not factored Arclight Phoenix into getting a bunch of cheap new spells?
I hadn't either.
Yeah, no, honestly, we should talk later. I think that Arclight Phoenix actually has a place in Boros Blitz now, especially with Orin.
Yeah, I could see it.
Man, alright, sorry, this is getting super off topic. I'm just going to say this real quick. Study Break is going to be the least represented card that's going to break Feather decks.
One of the things I really like about Faithless Looting is that it lets you discard cards that are sometimes irrelevant or are very situational to how the game is playing out. One of those cards that is situational on how good it is Grape Shot, which is a sorcery for 1 and a red that says Grape Shot deals 1 damage to any target and also has Storm. When you cast the spell, copy it for each spell cast before it this turn, and you get to choose new targets for those copies. Joker Boney, why don't you tell us about Grape Shot?
So the most important part about this card is it's the only Storm card that can be hit off of Collective Conjuring. Actually, it is maybe not the best Storm payoff, but it's a Storm payoff that's been seen in other formats like Modern before, and it's seen some play in Legacy, and usually what will happen with this is this will be compared rather unfavorably to Tendrils of Agony, but sometimes your list isn't playing black. And even though we just got Demonic Tutor, there's still going to be times where you don't want to be playing black and still be playing a Storm-esque strategy. Some things I've been thinking about with this card is maybe not quite a blitz style deck like we've seen it before, but blitz adjacent strategies where you're just dropping a bunch of spells targeting your stuff because you have a feather, or you've just made a bunch of mana the turn before, and this just gets you a few more points there, even if it's just clearing out a blocker so you can hit them with your 10/10, I don't know, like a Wumpus, whatever you put your pump spells on, it doesn't really matter at that point. This is also important with Magecraft cards because each copy you get off the Storm can trigger those as well. So if you're playing more of those cards, it gives it some more utility. So it'll be interesting to see if this one sees play. As for an all-in Storm strategy, this probably isn't the one you're going to be playing if you're going as all-in as possible, as we've seen in other 100-card formats. Usually they just play Tendrils. And maybe just due to what we have, we still want both, but there's a chance you only play one. So just keep an eye on it.
So, Joker,
Yes.
you're kind of one of the more experienced pilots of Thousand Year Storm in our format, and just the idea of Storm in general from a Gladiator perspective. Is there any merit to these Storm cards as payoffs just generally for those decks? I'm not so sure that they're as ubiquitous as they are in other formats.
They're not. I would say of the Storm cards we've seen, this is the one that's most likely to get into 1,000-Year Storm, just due to how that deck normally plays.
Because you want to play Collective Conjuring.
Well, not even because of that, but yes, that as well. Just, this is the one that's most likely to be able to be used fairly. People talk about in other formats, like, we didn't get this one, but Empty the Warrens. People talk about a short Empty to sort of stabilize the board. A short Grape Shot can clear out some creatures that are gonna kill you.
Yeah.
Like, I honestly could see myself on turn 5 dropping an Anger of the Gods and then using this to clear out their X5 or 2 of their X4s.
Mm-hmm.
And then sometimes you're just like, oh, regrowth my Grape Shot you, cast Balogad Recovery, getting regrowth and Grape Shot you again. And it's like, it can help out a little bit. Those decks don't really need a win con, I put in quotation marks, even though you can't see that, but
in fact, I think I see a more powerful win condition for these lists coming up pretty soon.
yes, but this one can do some work, and it's definitely possible that we'll see it popping up in 1,000-Year Storm lists. Just not all the Storm cards, and maybe not always.
Yeah.
So don't be surprised if this gets cut from some builds that are called Storm.
Yeah, don't be attached to the Storm mechanic. It's not always the best thing to be doing. It's just often the most efficient thing to be doing.
And in line with the idea of copying spells, our next card is Increasing Vengeance, which is red for an instant that says copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. If this spell was cast from a graveyard, copy that spell twice instead, and you may choose new targets for the copies. And it also has flashback for 3 and double red, which lets you cast it from the graveyard for its flashback cost and then exile it. Blightning, why don't you tell us about Increasing Vengeance?
Yeah, Increasing Vengeance is a bit more niche of a card, and it's not one that I'm expecting to see a lot of play. The Graveyard Clause is a bit cute. Like, it doesn't really tend to matter. You're playing this mostly because it's a 2-mana way to copy a spell. Though I kind of want to play Increasing Vengeance with Underworld Breach at some point in my life, because that sounds like fun. But I think one of the main uses for this, if it sees play, is going to be working with Ral Storm Conduit. Ral Storm Conduit is 2 blue-red for a Planeswalker from War of the Spark, with a couple abilities. The one that matters is that whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, Ral deals 1 damage to target opponent or Planeswalker. And Increasing Vengeance is another piece that we've gotten that allows you to copy spells on the stack. And if you get 2 versions of this, if you have 2 spells that can copy a spell, then you are able to create infinite copies on the stack and then kill your opponent with Ral. I haven't actually checked if there are Magecraft cards that also fill this role, but I presume there's at least one. This hasn't really seen play recently, but it's a kind of combo I'm rather fond of, and I might mess around with it again.
So to answer your question, Blightning, yes, there are Magecraft cards that fill this role, notably the Witherbloom Signpost Uncommon, the Witherbloom Apprentice, that's called, I believe it's called. It's
Yes.
Yep.
Magecraft Drain, and then Onyx as well is Magecraft Drain. I think a few others will fit
Right.
in other ways, but notably the Increasing Vengeance combo works with all Magecraft to infinitely trigger the Magecraft trigger, which can be useful in various ways other than just literally killing your opponent with damage.
Mhm.
Increasing Vengeance can also slide into Thousand Year Storm because that deck already plays Expansion, which importantly works for this combo. And it hasn't played those loops in the past just because the other cards that can do it aren't good, and Increasing Vengeance has that flashback mode, which is rather relevant.
Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah, so there's a chance it could
Yeah.
pop up in some other lists.
Dreadhorde Arcanist doesn't work with Increasing Vengeance, right? Because it's an attack trigger.
Yeah, I don't think you can stack that in a way there. You can get there.
From really niche combos to a completely ubiquitous card, it's Lightning Bolt. For a single red, it's an instant where Lightning Bolt deals 3 damage to any target. UFO.
Most powerful card in the archive, yes.
Dice to Bolt.
There's a reason that Lightning Bolt is so well known in Magic. It's one of the first cards printed.
Dice to Bolt.
Dice to Bolt is very much a thing, and the 3 damage threshold is getting more and more relevant in our format, especially with Lightning Bolt coming in. I can barely think of a deck that runs red that won't run Bolt. And if there are, they're going to be very niche. What red decks are going to be playing this? Well, everyone. But what does that mean, really? It means that control decks are going to have a bit more reach. Oftentimes, red-based control will be pushing your opponents down life total-wise in a lot of ways, and having another way to finish that off with a lightning bolt is quite good to have. Aggro decks have more efficient burn now. You've got Red Deck Wins, who loves this, all the various other fast red-based aggro lists, any other deck that's trying to have some sort of board presence. And then even going back to a deck we were talking about not too long ago, Thousand Year Storm. Thousand Year Storm played Shock because Shock was one of the best win conditions with a Thousand Year Storm in play, and Lightning Bolt is strictly better than Shock. So Lightning Bolt is basically the best thing to be doing for 1 red mana, and we have it now. Also notably, we have effective copies of the original Lightning Bolt cycle on Arena now. We have Giant Growth, Lightning Bolt, the Dominaria Healing Salve, and Dark Ritual.
And Brainstorm.
So, I mean, yeah, Brainstorm's the close successor, because technically that slot is for Ancestral Recall, but that card will never be printed on Arena, right?
Hopefully.
Right,
Let's
yeah.
hope.
What?
That'd just be entirely insane. Not impossible, technically, but insane.
We shouldn't.
The only red decks that I can think that wouldn't be playing Bolt are ones that physically can't for some reason. Like if Cowtech ever went into red, it wouldn't play Bolt.
There's some cards that make me think it might add red with this set.
Yeah, and
yeah, possibly.
the ultimate factor is that any red deck that isn't playing Bolt is handicapping itself. And I think that those decks that do have good reasons are still probably handicapping themselves by not playing Bolt. It's such an incredibly powerful card.
Yeah, they can't play Bolt because of an already existing handicap.
Yeah.
Now when we're talking about wildcard suggestions, it's like, okay, well you should get land, bolt, land, bolt, bolt.
I would grab Bolt before most lands at this point.
Really?
Yeah.
Mizzix's Mastery is 3 in a red for a sorcery that reads, exile target card that's an instant or sorcery from your graveyard. For each card exiled this way, copy it, and you may cast the copy without paying its mana cost. Exile Mizzix's Mastery. And then it has Overload for 5 red, where you can cast this spell for its overload cost, and if you do, you change its text by replacing all instances of target with each.
So that means that you exile each instant and sorcery in your graveyard, and you get to cast them all.
Indeed. Joker Bunny, why don't you tell us more about that fact?
This card is just very... This is a card that came in a dream, one might say. And it's very good. It can do some very silly things. I don't know if it's really going to be seeing a lot of play. I might try it out in Thousand Year Storm for a bit, but that's not exactly where it's going to see the best home. My number 1 place for this card, though, however, is Minotaur Storm. we're going to be casting Ironcrag Feat, which is a 4-mana sorcery that makes 7 mana. Then we cast Mizzix's Mastery, targeting our Deathbellow Warcry in the graveyard, and this way we can kill them.
I wouldn't Ironcrag Feat before Mizzix's Mastery.
You still need to cast the copies. They don't put them on the stack instantly.
Yeah, because yes,
but
okay.
we can just Mastery for 4 mana.
Point being is that we Mastery, we have 3 mana left over, and then we can just kill them.
Yeah, the deck would also be playing Ironcrag Feat as a way to get out Deathbell Warcry in a different way, but
Yes.
Mystic Mastery does not work with Ironcrag Feat the way we want it to.
Right, yeah. Sorry, I was like, oh, it does work, because it doesn't cast the Minotaurs, but it casts them.
It casts the spell that casts the Minotaurs, yes.
Well, it casts the copy of the spell.
And then it casts the spell.
Point being is that Deathbellow Warcry gets 4 Minotaurs into play. Yes, there is a kill with it. I'm not getting into it this episode.
The kill mostly uses the bad common haste Minotaurs, actually.
Well, no, actually the best kill to get around combat damage is to get Rageblood Shaman, Sethrun. Point being is that I'm going to make a really weird Grixis control deck that I've shoved 8 Minotaurs into.
And I'm extremely excited to see that.
Mizzix's Mastery is a fun card. Do fun things with it.
I'm planning on playing this in lands because mana doesn't exist in lands, and just casting, maybe overloading this to like get every land out of my deck like 3 times over, things like that.
I want to play this in like 5-color ultimatum nonsense.
Yeah, same.
Ooh,
Omnispell
alright.
Adept has a new friend.
Omnispell Adept does have a new friend.
We never actually did that thing with Omnispell Adept we wanted to.
The time did not work out for that.
No, we got too into warriors.
Yeah. We need to bring back Omnispell Adept.
I mean,
But yeah, honestly, Mizzix's Mastery targeting Sultimatum might be just like the strongest thing this card does.
Yeah.
maybe. It's hard to say because it requires a bit of setup in 4 different colors, but, you know.
Yeah.
Then we are in 4 colors, but it's still pretty strong.
But we can set this up with
Final Parting?
Well, I mean, Final Parting does it. I was actually gonna say
Faithless Looting.
Mythos of Faithless Looting also does it.
Mythos of Barocos does it, but not single-handedly.
Mythos of Bogos is only a single tutor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It doesn't single-handedly set it up. I forgot that it only returns permanents.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's ways to do it, and I like the idea. It's one thing you have to, tinker with just generally. A lot of combo in the format just requires a lot of dedicated pilots working on it and tinkering with it.
Yeah.
Rip pod.
And there's a lot of ways that you can just really abuse this card. Another card that you can potentially abuse in a lot of different ways is Stone Rain. For 2 and a red, you have a sorcery that says the magical 3 words of magic. Destroy target land. UFO, why don't you tell us about Stone Rain?
So I've been playing Gruul Stompy since basically the beginning of the format. And recently we've been getting a few more options for mana denial. Most recent being the land from Call of Time, the giant Gruul one, where you destroy target land and make a 4/4 trampler. And that has been surprisingly useful to continue to push a mana advantage in a deck like Stompy, where you're sometimes going to be making a bunch of mana and needing something to do with it. And Stone Rain, I think, has very similar use, where I like the idea of Stone Rain, especially with how mana is going to be functioning post Strixhaven release on your opponent's world tree to stop their fixing on maybe their key white land to make wraths less likely. Stone Rain has a lot of use as a single roadblock to buy a bit of extra time in a deck that otherwise won't have access to that sort of a roadblock. If you know what you're up against and what you need to worry about, Stone Rain can be used almost like a thought seize to say, no, you can't cast that thing I think you're going to be casting next turn. It requires a lot of sort of understanding of what you're playing against and a good knowledge of the board states that you need to be pushing towards, but it can have a lot of use there.
So Stone Rain is a tool of finesse and not a blunt hammer like the one being brought down on their lands.
I think the way it will be using Gladiator, yes. And then some people can play it in Thousand Year Storm and be happy that they killed all their opponent's lands.
Might get cast off of a Collective Conjuring. Who knows?
The card I'm actually wanting to use this with is Underworld Breach, where like you can just get to a point in the game where you're like, okay, I have like 11 mana. No, yeah, I have 11 mana available. My graveyard's filled up. Underworld Breach, kill half your lands, and just like laugh as in giddy joy as I blow up.
That definitely seems like a use case that people will go into.
Yeah, at least for theoretically building around the deck. It's definitely a good use for a lot of mana if you have a way to do anything even remotely repeatable with it. Another good way to use a lot of mana, or not even a good way, another way to use a lot of mana is Urza's Rage. For 2 in a red, it's an instant, and it has Kicker for 8 in a red. The spell can't be countered, and Urza's Rage deals 3 damage to any target. If it was kicked, it instead deals 10 damage to that permanent, and the damage can't be prevented. Joker Boney, tell us about this card.
Urza's Rage is the story of the Brothers' War. The brothers being Urza and Mishra. They were brothers that grew together and trained under the same master in the deserts of Falaja. They also, together, found the Might Stone and the Weak Stone. This is something that they ended up fighting over for quite a while, even though that this wasn't quite the Brothers' War. This caused them to split off and slowly grow on their own power. Eventually, when Urza met Mishra again, Urza found out that Mishra was corrupted by the Phyrexians. This caused a lot of pain for Urza. This is what sparked the Brothers' War, because Urza was trying to stop Mishra, thanks to Mishra's being corrupted and all. And this is why Urza had Rage. In the original art, we get to see him firing from a very powerful device. And this is the device that kills Mishra in the end. In this art, we get to see a little bit less, but we get to see this man. It's very mean, very old, and very angry. As for the card, it's probably going to see play in something because someone likes it, but otherwise probably not.
Yeah, unfortunately, while the lore behind this card is juicy and sweet, Urza's Rage gets the participation award of the archive. We're talking about it because it is a new card to Arena, and only because of that.
We have Fight with Fire.
Yes.
Yeah, Fight with Fire is not strictly better, but it is normal better.
Both modes of Fight with Fire are usually better than this.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if you need something that can do a bunch of damage and can't be countered, the actual mana that you're putting into Urza's Rage would be better served on a Banefire.
Yeah.
Although if you are going to play an open fire, like if you open this in draft and end up having to take it for whatever reason, an open fire isn't the worst. Like sorcery speed, deal 3 damage, and
Instant speed, actually, but yes.
is it instant?
Yeah.
Okay. It's okay, so it's
It is open fire, yeah.
it's precision bolt, that sorcery.
Yep.
Point being is like an open fire isn't the worst. Like if you play this and you kill someone with it, people might be a little bit surprised, but not by that much. Like it'll kill people.
Yeah, it's not like terrible. It's just not. It's from a time of Magic where spells were worse
We just talked about lightning bolt.
because the first set of Magic was so brokenly overtuned.
Yes.
I won't be surprised or like mad if someone kills me with an Urza's Rage, kicked or unkicked, because yeah, it's a open fire isn't a terrible card, but I'm also not going to be telling people to play Urza's Rage. It's a card that I will be.
Don't spend a wild card on this.
Yeah.
Yeah. Unless you're me.
I mean, you've got the Parallax version of Hitotsugu second, right?
And I'll get the Parallax version of Urza's Rage.
You mean you get the Japanese version?
I mean, that too.
Yeah, I think we just have
The Japanese version is very good. If we're talking about art in this set, like, it's not top, but it's like,
It's beautiful.
Oh yeah.
any time that we get to see Urza just be angry, people just kill it for some reason. Like, I'm not a fan of Urza Lord High Artificer if we're talking about art, but like Urza's Rage, stuff like that, like, just, ooh.
Also, Japanese Urza has dragon hands.
Yes.
Ooh.
Yeah. We really love seeing folks being angry and dealing damage at instant speed.
It's the gay agenda.
Kind of the other side of emotions. We have Abundant Harvest, which features in its normal art a woman looking, I can't tell what emotion, but it looks slightly solemn.
Pensive, I think I'd call that.
Pensive, there we go. That's a good word. It's
Pensive Simulacrum.
Yeah. It's a green for a sorcery that says choose land or non-land. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a card of the chosen kind. Put that card into your hand and the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Lightning, why don't you tell us about this card being a preprint from Modern Horizons 2?
Well, I mean, you mostly said it for me. But yes, this card has not been printed before. It is in the Mystical Archive, but its air quotes proper release will be in Modern Horizons 2. but we're still getting it, and I'm very happy we are, because I really like this card. I've already mentioned before that we're low on 1-mana cantrips, which is why Brainstorm was also a thing I was super excited about, and this fills that role pretty well. It has the flexibility of either being a guaranteed land drop or a guaranteed spell, and it's a card you're going to be able and willing to cast at just about any point in the game, and at 1 mana, it's mostly not a problem to do so. Sorcery speed does hurt this card, but I'm probably playing this in a lot of green decks. And it's making me want to build like a green version of the Dreadhorde Arcanist decks, because flashing this back sounds like fun.
Ooh,
Yeah, how well does this compare to like Flower Flourish?
I think this is much better than Flower.
Much better.
I think it compares better to Flower. The card I'm actually looking at comparing it to is Once Upon a Time, which Abundant Harvest is worse than Once Upon a Time because that card's too good. However, Abundant Harvest still fills that same kind of role where it will always be a cheap way to find something you want to see, whether that be a land, allowing you to keep a lot of 1 or 2 landers that you otherwise wouldn't be able to keep, or also, on the flip side, letting you keep some hands with higher land counts because Abundant Harvest will always be a spell in those cases. And so it does work well.
So Seismic, I wanted to pitch this to you. How does this fare in Treasure Hunt?
Good question. So there's a surprising amount of nuance with this in Zombie Hunt. The first idea to have with that is that it can be used as a replacement for what is currently a Grim tutor. So Abundant Harvest lets us essentially tutor for either Treasure Hunt or Zombie Infestation. Not being able to choose which one is a huge damper, and also making mana a bit worse, which shouldn't be a problem for a deck that is like 90-something% lands. That shouldn't be a problem, but it kind of is.
No, that's fair. I just thought it was worth talking about because
it's definitely worth thinking about. I think it ultimately would get in over Grim Tutor, but we're also getting cards like Demonic Tutor in this set, and so Demonic Tutor would probably be better than this card for that deck specifically.
Yeah, that's fair. It depends on what lands you're playing and all. It just felt like it was worth having the discussion because it's like, oh hey, this card just reads, get whichever piece you're missing. Whee!
Yeah, and it does work pretty well at that. And I think there is a world where Abundant Harvest definitely would slot into that. And I'm okay if that's the world we live in. Speaking of
Speaking of the world we live in.
Speaking of the world we live in, it's a channel world now, baby. Actually, no, I like that. Speaking of the world we live in, it's a channel world now, baby. Channel is green for a sorcery that reads, until end of turn, anytime you could activate a mana ability, you may pay 1 life. If you do, add a colorless. UFO, why don't you tell us about Channel?
Channel is an extremely unique effect where you're able to put in 2 green and then as much life as you feel comfortable with to get a bunch of colorless mana. Really upwards of 19 technically, sometimes even more if you've been doing other things. But generally, you pay mana and you get a bunch more mana. But this mana is only colorless, which means you need to be doing very specific things with that mana. We have a few payoffs to use, notably Ulamog the Ceaseless Hunger, a 10/10 indestructible for 10 that when you cast it exiles 2 permanents, which, could be a very powerful turn 2 if you get both those cards in your hand, but there's really no way to set it up. So it's a very high roll sort of idea. And the thing about Channel just generally is, as far as we're seeing right now, it is going to be excessively high rolly when built by many players, where you have these cards that work with Channel, but cost so much that people have very, very rarely been playing them in a regular deck before it. So the idea for Channel is you need to figure out a way to make a deck that can use that insane burst of mana from Channel to win, while also being able to use those cards that want that burst of mana without Channel in play. It's the Channel strategy is hard to crack, and it is different for every place that Channel is legal. Sometimes it can be excessively powerful. Sometimes it can just be another tool in the arsenal of a deck. And I'm really interested to see where Gladiator takes that.
I'm also really interested. Channel is a card that I think for the first glance that you look at it, you say, okay, I can put this into an X spell or an Ulamog and win the game, or I can use it to like maybe add 4 mana and get out a 6-drop that does a lot of work on turn 4. And that's a serviceable and good use of a channel. And I think that's probably the most consistently good use of channel, that you won't be absolutely burned out by not having channel when you have, say, an Ulamog or some other big colorless requirement spell, or when you have those big spells but not channel.
Yeah.
Red green ramp, baby.
I think that the danger of channel is not always even going to be for your opponent, but for yourself, where you need to be mindful of what you do when you don't have channel, because you're not always going to have channel.
And also your own life total. You can accidentally pay your own life total. Just be careful.
I think that a lot of people will not only have that literal hubris of accidentally actually channeling themselves to death, but also a general gameplay hubris of, you put in 6 life into channel, you play a huge thing, and then it gets answered quickly, and then you're probably losing that game because you just paid a large amount of life.
Tempo, cards, yeah.
Yeah.
You pay a bunch of life into a channel to channel out a big thing, and then it gets answered by a Doomblade. You're now very down in almost every metric of a game that can be made.
Yeah. The life cost of channel, while not nearly as significant as the mana cost that you would normally be paying, does factor into a surprising amount of matchups and gameplay situations where there's a lot of situations where I think it would be absolutely wrong to cast channel because it would lead you to leaving yourself way too vulnerable to any piece of interaction. Bolt too, yeah.
Yeah, and I think the ceiling for channel is known to be very high, right? Like there are some nut draws with channel that in theory can win on turn 2. But that sort of theory crafting has already existed within our format already. Turn 2 wins have been possible for a very long time with very specific hands. And channel, while making those hands a little less magical Christmas land, will often, in my eyes, be similar to a aggro deck high rolling and killing you on turn 3 without very much effort. We have some very fast decks in the format, and channel just brings some decks that weren't traditionally fast into that speed, in my eyes. At least possibly. What I really want to know, though, is what the floor for a deck trying to be built around channel is. Because while the ceiling we know is excessively high to the point of winning the game on the spot, the floor could also be very low to the point of losing the game on the spot if the deck building doesn't always work for you. And you're slowing yourself down by playing all these things that can be channel payoffs, which means it's very hard to, at least in my eyes, looking at this without yet having the cards physically in my hands, get an idea of how the average game of a deck trying to win with channel will be. And the average game is what I think we need to be focusing on.
Definitely agreed. And channel definitely allows for a lot of fast strats to happen. I think generally it's going to be a supplement to hands that are already decent. A card that doesn't look as much on fast magic, but instead looks at the longer game is Harmonize, which is 2 green for a sorcery that says just 3 words, draw 3 cards. The highest potential I see for this card is that green doesn't have that much good burst card draw, and a lot of the burst card draw that it has currently is based on board state. We have really good ways to draw cards in green, and we have really good engines to keep drawing cards even into the late game. However, a lot of those are just that, engines. And some decks and some scenarios in those decks, you don't really care about being able to draw cards for the next 4 turns, you just want to draw cards now. And cards like Beast Whisperer, which is 4 mana for a 2/3 that says whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. That card's great, but it also usually doesn't draw more than a card, if any cards at all, on the turn it comes in. And Harmonize is one of the few effects that we have that essentially guarantees a way to draw a good amount of cards immediately, and some decks will really profit off of that, especially green-based ramp decks that already have these engines but need a way to just draw into a way that immediately demands a board-wide answer. And Harmonize is one of the better ways to do that.
Yeah, I know that I'll be putting this into Paradorks quite often. Even though that deck does run blue, Harmonize fits more into the colors of the deck.
Yeah, I also just see like playing this in like as talked about a bit, like playing this in like a Sultai control deck, just like the more reclamation style, because it doesn't mind tapping on its turn for more selection. I have played some other card selection spells, and this one just gets 3 cards into your hand, which can sometimes be more important.
Yeah, in terms of raw card draw, this is actually more powerful per mana than any other blue card we have on Arena.
Yeah.
And on top of that, there are other ways to draw a lot of cards that I would play over Harmonize in certain decks. Like, I might play Blessing of Frost over Harmonize in a mono green hoof deck.
Return of the Wild Speaker in the same sort of vein.
Yeah, those cards
care about big creatures to draw cards, basically.
Yeah, and the biggest problem with those cards is that if my opponent plays a Wrath and suddenly I have no board, those cards are useless to me, completely and utterly.
Yeah.
And Harmonize doesn't suffer from that problem, and in fact is much better after my opponent has wiped the board, because it lets me immediately develop my board again to the point where it's a threat that needs to be wiped immediately again. Speaking of threats and more so answers to threats, we have Krosan Grip for 2 and a green. It's an instant with Split Second. As long as the spell is on the stack, players can't cast spells or activate abilities that aren't mana abilities. This includes the controller of the spell. And it also has Destroy Target Artifact or Enchantment. UFO, why don't you tell us about this card?
Krosan Grip is, in every sense of the word, a tech card, where it will come in and function within specific matchups to really help you do things better within them. Krosan Grip comes down and is your answer for Wilderness Reclamation if you're having issues with that type of list, because it's very rare that you're going to be able to remove a Wilderness Reclamation without the opponent playing it having some way to answer your attempt at removing it. Split Second on Krosan Grip means that no counter magic or any other chicanery could happen on Arena. There are a few spells in Magic that can stop a Krosan Grip, but we don't have any of them. And then past that, let's say, back to a card we talked about not too long ago, Channel. A few things that you could be channeling out are big, crazy artifacts, big, crazy enchantments, and Krosan Grip can stop them from making use of those before really they get to do anything with that extra mana or extra value from those artifacts or enchantments. Krosan Grip has a very favorable matchup against, say, someone trying to play an Omniscience deck, if you really need to kill an Omniscience quickly. Just generally, Krosan Grip is very good at being anti-combo in our format, because most of the combo stuff in our format, notably Omniscience, Thousand Year Storm, and Paradox Engine, all are hit by Krosan Grip, and Krosan Grip gets through any of the protection that could otherwise be played in these types of lists.
It also stops decks that try to win with removal on the stack or can win a game at instant speed. For example, Omniscience especially will often be able to have some sort of way to win at instant speed, provided they have the right cards in hand, and Krosan Grip kind of stops those decks in their tracks, allowing you to be assured that a specific combo won't win the game immediately.
Yeah, exactly.
Even going into other combos that might start seeing play because of Strixhaven, this hits Underworld Breach, this hits Hazoret's Monument. This is just like, if combo becomes...
Hazoret's Monument?
There's a Bergy Grinning Ignis loop that makes infinite colorless, and that gets you to draw your deck. And
right, the deck with a terrible name.
Meat Storm.
Don't even mention it. It's just Bergy Storm. Bergy Storm.
Oh my god.
It's not even Storm. It's more like a Lurin.
Of course that's the name people gave it. This is the first I'd heard of that.
I won't be calling it Meat Storm. I'll be calling it tasty.
That's not better.
It's not even meat. Like, it's not even Storm is the issue. Like, the best way to win with it is just like a finale of Devastation.
Yeah, I mean,
Just like get Oketra's monument out, make infinite mana, or like whatever. Point being is it like whatever. It like doesn't even need to play Storm. Just make like a Jund deck and like this. Yeah.
well,
Whatever.
I mean, our disdain for magic names aside, yeah, Crossing Grip, honestly, a great way to kill Cowtech, great way to kill emergent gameplay. You can really stop Fruity Pebbles in its tracks, and any sort of other tempo build that wants to be using their enchantments.
Oh, also Paradox.
No, it doesn't get around Persistent Pain.
Yeah, Paradox, Paradorks. Persistent Pain, yeah, it doesn't really stop Persistent Pain, and the rat meme also doesn't really care about Crossing Grip, though I'm out of weird deck names.
It sometimes stops Saheeli Dragon, as long as they're on Oath of Teferi.
It does. Yeah, because it makes an artifact. They're an artifact. No.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
He's made an artifact copies. Wow.
And then Vanishar doesn't care about it.
No, Vanishar does.
Only certain Vanishar lines.
Well, Vanishar definitely cares about it if they're doing a salvager line.
What's it called? They never get priority at that point because once it comes into play, you can sacrifice.
Oh, yeah.
It. Unless they are playing incorrectly, there's never. Oh, if they're doing a salvager Uro loop, it does because they get priority once the Uro trigger goes on the stack.
And then also, this is actually pretty good against hot Paradorks because they care about the red enchantments that give haste so much.
It also stops back on Vanishar. It also stops the Relic Vial loops.
Oh no, Relic Vial's not going to be as good.
Yeah, it also stops UFO your Crumbling Castle deck.
True, Crumbling Castle does hate this Crossing Grip. Anyway.
We've named all things that I've seen playing Gladiator. I wish to mention.
Now that everyone is thoroughly confused.
Ooh, wait, it actually stops Zombie Hunt.
Oh, it does.
I'm glad we went full circle with that.
Now that we've gone full circle, why not the Circle of Life?
Oh, that is a good transition, Joker. Damn it. Natural Order is 2 green for a sorcery that says, as an additional cost to cast the spell, sacrifice a green creature. Search your library for a green creature card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle. Blightning, how are you going to bust this card open?
I mean, the answer is probably just Craterhoof Behemoth a lot of the time. Natural Order is another creature tutor. We have a few of these already that see play. I think the biggest one that I've come across is Vivian Monsters Advocate. Most of our tutors that put cards onto the battlefield, they're either restricted in what they can grab with stuff like Neoform, where you sacrifice a creature and can get a card that's exactly 1 CMC higher than the sacrificed creature, or they cost a ton of mana to get something large with things like Fiend Artisan. And Natural Order doesn't have no restriction. Like, forcing you to sacrifice a green creature and only get a green creature is probably going to have some significance occasionally, but also you're playing a green creature deck and you're going to have plenty of hits for this anyways.
Yep. Turn a Gilded Goose into a Craterhoof Behemoth and kill them.
I wanna mention, just because this is something that doesn't come up for a lot of people, or a lot of people don't really give this credence. I want to make a very specific point in mentioning the fact that while yes, this is going to get Craterhoof Behemoth and kill people a lot of the time, the strength of Natural Order, at least in other formats where it isn't just always killing them guaranteed, is its non-hoof hits. And our best non-hoof hit is Coma.
Or disagree.
What's the second best hit then?
I'd put Kogla ahead of it.
Kogla or Carnage Tyrant in my eyes.
I don't think I'm adding Carnage Tyrant to lists.
I don't think I'm adding Coma to lists. I'm very personally against Coma in most decks in Gladiator.
I think that there's more discussion to be had. I think it depends on your the build of hoof and stuff like that. Like, I think in a base blue-green hoof, like I think if you're on Kinnian, you should be on Coma right now.
This is a good reason for me to build Simic Hoof finally. Finally actually finish it.
So like to get back on the discussion, I think because in other formats it can get
Progenitus, usually.
well, it can get Progenitus. Sometimes it'll get cards like Rurik Thar. I'm not going to explain these because these aren't in Gladiator, so they aren't super relevant to the discussion.
There's that one from Battle Bond that's often got.
Yeah, that one as well. Point being is that it can get some very powerful cards that make the game hell for your opponent and usually win the game on their own if that happens.
Yeah, silver bullets that really just destroy a matchup.
And while we have cards that can sometimes be rather potent, like Coma or Kogla or Carnage Tyrant, this is not as powerful as some of the other things it can do in other formats. So don't get scared when you see Natural Order in this format just because, oh, they're going to hoof me on turn 3. We don't have the 1-mana dorks for that. We just don't.
And then going back to a few things that have been talked about, say, I would not be surprised to see a disallow or some other stifle effect hitting the Crater Hoof trigger to just win you the game.
That as well.
And considering that stifle effects are getting more credence with people looking to build Fastest Oracle combo decks with Tainted Pact, there's much more stock in playing them.
Yeah.
I think that especially in the early turns of the game, like if you do have a 1 or 2 drop dork, you're probably not going to be seeing Natural Order getting Crater Hoof. You're probably going to be seeing it grab a decent 6 or 7 mana creature that will usually,
Or Elder Gargaroth.
yeah, or even an Elder Gargaroth. Yeah, I will.
Depending on the matchups, I don't know. Like I think there are games where you do that, and then you.
It's pronounced Gargaroth.
Yeah,
No,
Gargaroth.
Gargaroth.
Elder Gargaroth.
it is Gargaroth.
No, it's Gargaroth.
If we lose
Gargaroth.
subscribers thanks to Gargaroth, I'm gonna. We will end you.
I'm saying this for Effie. It's Gargaroth.
Yes, it's Gargaroth.
Oh, I'm aware. But the fact that it annoys someone means I'm going to continue with it.
Fact of the matter is, I don't think that people should look at Natural Order and be scared and think that it's going to automatically kill them every time. There's going to be a lot of times that they Natural Order on like turn 4, turn 5, or even turn 3 sometimes. It'll happen. Sure, it'll happen. And then you're just like, oh, Doomblade. Oh, Heartless Act. Oh, Soul Shatter. Yeah, it's like, oh, you sacrifice your only creature for this big creature. Angrass Rampage.
The big lesson to grab from Natural Order is that you should never concede in response to a Natural Order, because the fact that you don't concede in response to a Natural Order might actually affect the decisions made by the person playing Natural Order. And there are a lot of different ways to play around Natural Order depending on what's grabbed by Natural Order. A lot of the times, Natural Order will be able to be answered by a Doomblade. If they're grabbing Hoof, Settle the Wreckage is still definitely a powerful card that you'll usually be able to cast at the time that they try and do something incredibly busted with Hoof.
Teferi's Protection and Wrath.
That's all. Yeah, like we have ways around anything that happens from a Natural Order. The biggest power of Natural Order is that it's less predictable than other ways we've seen Hoof decks win the game.
Yeah.
Like,
I do want to say, do not just shove Natural Order and Hoof into a list. That is not good. It is too cute. You will lose too many games to drawing the Hoof, to drawing the Natural Order.
Yeah, like Natural Order doesn't go into, say,
Golgari Aggro.
Golgari Aggro, Gruul Aggro. There's an argument for like an Selesnya mid-range because they're going a little bit higher. But even then, you're playing an 8-drop in a deck that doesn't really want to curve out past 5.
Yeah.
Natural Order in those decks also have a chance to 2-for-1 yourself because you're just like, in this kind of deck, you're sacrificing a creature that unless you're sacrificing a 1-drop that has gotten outclassed, you're not likely to, like, you can't sacrifice one of your your white 2/1s to this because it can only sacrifice a green creature, so you're probably sacrificing a mana dork, which may be helping you double spell.
Or one of your 3-drop green creatures that has good stats for its cost and was already decent with what it was. Like,
there's a chance that you just throw the game by Natural Ordering in those decks because it doesn't support playing it properly, I guess is the best way to say it.
Again, Natural Order has a very high ceiling, but the floor is hard to tell, and the literal floor is you sacrifice something big, it gets countered, and you lose the game instantly. But The average is what we need to figure out again, and I don't know.
It's hard to tell that right now.
It's hard to tell. It's hard to tell the average of play pattern for any of these cards in the archive, and that's really the point that I think we want to drive home.
It'll be fun to play this one for sure. It'll be 100% fun to play this one and see what happens. And 100% there'll be games where it's like, you'll die on turn 4 because they cast this after casting a bunch of dorks. And then you just like, your removal just didn't line up or whatever, but...
And I know I sound like a broken record, but I've died on turn 4 so many times because my opponent had a 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop Hellrider.
Yeah.
Yeah. The real power move I'm going to do is when I see a artifact or enchantment that I absolutely need to answer, I'm probably going to end up natural ordering like a 2 or a 3-drop in order to find a Reclamation Sage.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to be down like 4 mana, and I'm still going to be moderately okay with it. It's a bullet I'll bite.
I'm very curious to see the amount of games where I natural order for Kinnan. You say Gargaroth, I can say Kinnan.
I mean, if I can say Gargaroth.
No, don't say Gargaroth.
No.
Say Gargaroth.
So Kinnan, point being is that Kinnan's a way that can very easily win the game just because it's a 2-drop that makes your ramp better and has an activated ability that just puts creatures into play. So I think that's honestly going to be the thing that really sets it for me if natural order is just good or if it's broken, is how many times I'm going to be like, oh, I just need to find this Kinnan so I can set up an infinite combo. I think the number one thing that's going to set this for me, is how many times UFO loses a game thinking he can sacrifice his crashing drawbridge to natural order.
I mean, yeah, actually, that honestly might be...
What?
If this was an instant, I could see that happening more often.
Yeah. Point. Sisei. I'm going to find Sisei and Kinnan with this, and we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, well, it's interesting.
So, Joker Bunny, you really like tutoring for Kinnan and Sisei, don't you?
Sometimes.
And in those cases, may I offer you one primal command? It's 3 green for a sorcery, where you choose 2. Either target player gains 7 life, put target non-creature permanent on top of its owner's library, target player shuffles their graveyard into their library, or search your library for a creature card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. Joker Bunny, why don't you tell us more?
So, there's a few things I want to talk about with this card. It's gonna seem not very exciting, because it doesn't do a lot on its face, but there's some very, very important modes on this that I want to talk about. Most importantly, I want to talk about it shuffling cards back into the library and the gaining 7 life. I'm going to talk about them a bit in different cases. So, gaining 7 life, this is just going... If this doesn't stabilize you, you aren't winning that game anyway. It can't always create the swing turn, but this can sort of set you in a position where you can make a swing turn happen. This can help you dig yourself back into a game pretty easily. Obviously, it's going to need some help, and sometimes you just don't get there, but that helps a lot. The shuffling all the cards from the graveyard back into the library. I'd like to mention one very important part before getting to the second point. This says target player. A bunch of people are going to be doing some some Underworld Breach shenanigans, which importantly lets you cast cards from your graveyard. Just primal command them. Just, send them to the Shadow Realm. They're about to pop off. They're like, I've got all my graveyard fuel here. And then it's like, no, you don't.
Yeah, or if you have against a deck that has just like 2 or something to the top of their library, a forced shuffle will help you there.
Shuffle their Scarab God back in.
Yeah, shuffle their Scarab God, shuffle their Approach the Second Sun. Like,
shuffle any of the God Eternals?
Yeah, just getting rid of these effects that can cause your opponent to gain a lot of value or just win the game sometimes is very good. And then also how this synergizes with the last mode. Because of how this card is ordered, if you choose that shuffle mode first, targeting yourself, and then the creature tutor mode, you can shuffle back in an important creature that you needed and that got killed or got milled or discarded, like if they thought seized it away or something. This can be a way to... This card can read 5 mana, get a creature from your graveyard to your hand, which is the best, obviously, but it's an effect that we don't always see in green.
Yeah.
You're not always going to be playing Balagad Recovery or Recollect or Regrowth. This card can sometimes be a creature tutor when you need it, when you need a specific card in your deck, and sometimes you just need 5 mana Raise Dead. And then probably the least important mode on this card, in the combo sense. In the fair sense, it's the best mode on this card. But put target non-creature permanent on top of its owner library, this is just fine. Like, target their planeswalker they tapped out for, target their game-winning enchantment that they need to untap with. Ever put an omniscience on top of somebody's deck?
Notably, this does go before the graveyard shuffle, so you are able to put a non-creature permanent on top of their deck and then have them shuffle it back into their library, where presumably they're just never going to see it again.
Yeah, we have big enough libraries in this format that shuffling someone's library means if they knew something was on top, they will never see that card again more often than not.
Also, this could just target someone's land. If they're behind on land, just send them to the Shadow Realm. Just be like, oh, I see that you missed, you're on 3 lands and you had a dork that I killed or something. Put your world...
I don't think I would shuffle in that situation, but yeah, you just
Yeah,
send
it
them back.
depends.
Send them back on tempo. Search your deck for I don't know, maybe a Goblin Ruin Blaster.
Oh,
Yes.
this is going to be the nail in the coffin of whenever I play land dork, land another dork, and then opponents just like, oh, I missed my 3rd land drop. Here's like a cantrip. And then I'm just like, okay, turn 3, put your tap land back on top, say bye.
Oh, you love hitting tap lands with this because it gets them back effectively 2 turns of tempo.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they have to draw this tap land for turn, and they will likely have to play that tap land, and that means that they're down a mana, they're down a card.
Oh, I cannot wait to use Primal Command in surprisingly fair ways.
And then Stone Rain, Ravager Worm,
Yeah, alright,
Notwell Slumbermound.
alright, I'm listening.
I don't know what else we have that can interact with lands in that way.
Wake the Trolls?
Oh yeah, again, Goblin Ruin Blaster.
We have a surprisingly high number of ways to take care of lands now, especially if you include the really bad ones, that there might be a really bad Ponza deck. Yeah.
I'm listening. Alright.
It'd be fun. It wouldn't be good, but it'd be fun.
No, okay, so hear me out. So we curve Primal Command into Vivictus, and then we just set them off of lands forever.
I mean, you could do that, but then Vivictus turns their lands into potentially better cards.
Yeah, I don't really want to see a land turn into an Elder Garth.
We target the Gargaroth with a Doomblade before blocks. It's fine.
In all fairness, I do like Vivictus Asmati as a card, and I do want to see an all permanence deck in Gladiator that has Vivictus Asmati and like
Chaos Warp.
Yeah, Chaos Warp. Chaos Warp is like its one non-permanent card.
Yeah, just like with very minimal non-permanence. Oh man, you Vivictus, you put in Wake the Trolls. Alright. I'm gonna build a very bad Jund deck soon.
I am counting on all of you to make both the most mediocre Ponza deck that we're going to see in this format, and also the most potentially infuriating deck on Arena.
Oh, alright. I know that you're listening, Dwagons. We should talk about Jund.
So petition.
What?
Elder Gargaroth, I'm gonna call Greg from now on. How do we feel about that?
Elder Greg? We still say Elder. We still say Elder.
Elder Greg, I like that. Yeah.
Elder Greg.
Yep, I'm okay with that.
Okay, I'll take it. It's an upgrade.
However, if your opponent's playing a Ponza-style deck where they're destroying all of your lands, I might suggest a way to get back a land to your hand. That card would be Regrowth, which is 1 and a green for a sorcery that reads, return target card from your graveyard to your hand. Lightning, why don't you tell us about this card?
Yeah, so Regrowth is an effect we have a few copies of. The most common ones that I see played are Balaged Recovery, which is 3 mana for this effect, but it's also a modal double-faced card, so it has a backside where it can be a tap land. And Tamiyo Collector of Tales, which is 2 green-blue for a Planeswalker who can -2 return a card from your graveyard, and also take up to sometimes get a card from the top of your library. But while Regrowth doesn't have as much utility as either of those cards, it's also 2 mana is substantially cheaper than 4 when comparing Regrowth to Tamiyo. And I'm not entirely sure if this is going to see as much play. I'm definitely interested in trying it, because allowing you to buy back even just another removal spell, buy back a Crux of Fate, to deal with aggro again, buy back another way to draw a few cards and really pull ahead, buy back the Wilderness Reclamation that your cruel opponent Crows and Grip. I'm going to be playing this card a good bit, I think. And it'll never be the best thing you're doing, but it's never really going to be bad.
Never the best thing. I'm hopping over this table.
It's 2 mana more for the best thing you've already done, which is pretty fair.
Yeah. And I think that this doesn't get into a deck over Balagad Recovery because the cost of inclusion for Balagad Recovery being a modal dual-faced land is a little bit lower. But a lot of decks may want a second effect, and the card that was previously played in that sort of slot, Recollect, is just a little bit worse than Regrowth.
Yeah, it's 1 mana more, but they gave me another recover. They gave us another way to get cards back from our graveyard. Oh, Storm.
Yeah, you were jumping for joy when Balagad Recovery was printed because it enabled Storm Loops.
Yes, it did, and now we have a third copy, and this one's good.
The card I've been using in that kind of slot before Balagad Recovery came around was Once in Future, which is 3 and a green for an instant that essentially if you cast it for 1 green, you get to have 2 regrowths and then it exiles itself. The fact that I can do half of that for half the mana cost and it doesn't exile itself is much better.
Yeah, Once in Future is a little different, but it definitely has similar utility to what Regrowth will be in most decks.
And
Regrowth, target, time walk.
Oh, you know I'm going to be doing that plenty.
But yeah, if you know anything about me on the server, this is gonna cause a lot more treasure to be made, and I'll probably, Please don't concede if I say that I'm trying to get my daily spells in. I don't have a lot of time to play Magic.
Speaking of having a lot of time to play Magic, there's a certain card that will give someone a lot more time to play Magic, and that's Weather the Storm, which is 1 and a green for an instant that says you gain 3 life and also has Storm. So whenever you cast it, you copy it for each spell cast before it. This card is really interesting. I'm planning on just playing this in decks that do a lot of things at once that aren't Storm, like in heavy air quotes. I'm going to be playing this in Elfhoof decks where there's a lot of board scenarios where I will just be playing, 10 spells in a turn in order to make my board massive because everything makes mana and I get to cast spells off the top of my deck. This is a really good way to make sure that when I'm capping those turns off, that whoever I'm against won't be able to kill me even if they sweep my board or have some way to deal a large amount of damage to me afterward. And Weather the Storm makes me a little bit less afraid of Emergent Ultimatum, getting specifically Ob Nixilis and Peer Through the Abyss, which I think we figured out it deals on average usually about 60 damage.
It's actually a little scalable because it first halves your life total. So basically, it will half your life total and then deal damage to you equal to half your deck. So the typical maximum is actually 80.
Yeah, so you need to be about 100 to start living, but...
Okay, and so Weather the Storm doesn't save you from that, but it certainly makes it more possible that you don't immediately die, especially if you have the most outrageous turns in Magic, which that's kind of my whole shtick.
Also, I just think that Weather the Storm fits into a deck we were talking about earlier with the most obvious use, in my eyes, for Tendrils of Agony, which is Bolas' Citadel Storm, where it's another way to pad out your life total to allow you to do more Bolas' Citadel shenanigans.
Yeah, just cast this off of your Bolas' Citadel, gain a bunch of life. Also helps you combo in with stuff like Aetherflux Reservoir, just, whoops, I gain 50 life. Especially if people are going to start playing effects like Shalai, which gives you hexproof.
Yeah, where you need 100 life to kill with an Aetherflux.
Yeah, Weather the Storm is how we actually get 100 life to beat to beat the Shalai.
One big thing especially with decks like Paradox that oftentimes spend a lot of their time and mana devoted to building a board state that can combo in potentially the next turn. Weather the Storm works really well in order to pad your life total against aggro for those decks, where if on turn 4, which is sometimes feasible, I can go, play 3 spells and have 2 mana left over because I played only 2-drop rocks and manoliths, then if I can cap that off by playing Weather the Storm and gaining 12 life, then I'm pretty safe against aggro for comboing off on the turn after or even the turn after that, just because padding your life out the amount that Weather the Storm does allows you to actually be able to spend turns not really committing to the board if you know you're going to win the turn after and you can pad your life total out now.
It's a way to buy time.
Yeah, and I think a decent number of paradox-based decks really focus on the fact that they really need to buy time.
Definitely.
One card that I've been waiting for in this format for a long time is Electrolyze. Electrolyze is 1 blue-red for an instant that reads, Electrolyze deals 2 damage divided as you choose among 1 or 2 targets. And draw a card. Lightning, why don't you tell us about this one?
Sorry, I got caught up in looking at this art, and I really love it. But Electrolyze...
It's good art.
It's such good art. I love the look of this card, and I also do love the card itself. I'm still not entirely sure on where it slots in to a lot of the blue-red decks I'm playing, but as a card, it's likely going to be able to kill a small creature. It doesn't scale the best, but we definitely still have a few, 2s and 3s that you do need to be killing, and that Electrolyze will deal with. And sometimes it's going to be able to hit 2 creatures at once, or finish off a planeswalker and then also hit this 1/1. And in those scenarios, you're just up so much advantage because this also replaces itself. And I'm not sure if this card's this card I don't think is my top pick for the blue-red decks in this set, simply because we also got Lightning Bolt and stuff. But I'm definitely excited to play with it.
There's a lot of X1s running around, and Electrolyze deals with those very cleanly.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see where this one lands exactly. It's 3 mana, which is a lot, which could be problematic for some decks. Some archetypes may just not be able to play it because they just need to answer stuff faster. But it's a very good value card, and probably there's going to be times where it just kills people.
I mean, how many times has Shadow Skull Smashing for 4 just killed 2 things?
Yeah.
There's a shocking amount of things that have 1 toughness in especially aggressive decks, that the number of times that you'll be able to play this on curve to kill 2 creatures will be way surprising.
And don't even talk to me about how badly this screws Paradorks.
Oh, yeah.
This card single-handedly is making me reevaluate how many X1s I'm playing in decks like Boros D&T. Which is to say, I am playing a lot less, because we got a lot of really good bears recently.
Mm-hmm.
The reason that Electrolyze makes you think about how many X1s you're playing is that Electrolyze will see play regardless of if there's a lot of X1s in the format. And that fact means that whereas with other cards that are better than Electrolyze at killing a lot of X1s, Electrolyze is also much better at still affecting the board when there aren't a lot of X1s.
Or just the game state in general. I think Electrolyze is a fine card to have against, even in the control mirror. You just throw it out, get 2 life down in the life total race, and draw a card.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not saying that this card is bad. I'm not saying that this card shouldn't see play in a lot of decks. This is also just a card that people will include despite anything else. Doesn't matter the meta, doesn't matter anything else. This is just a card that people like playing.
Mm-hmm.
Just because when people talk about value in a format, this is definitely one of those cards that comes up where it's just it's Electrolyze. How could you not be playing it? So much value. And whether or not it's correct to play, people are just be like, give me that Electrolyze. So it's definitely a card that's just you need to keep in the back of your mind, because if your opponent plays a blue-red land, they might just have it.
Woe be to the day we get Delver Secrets on Arena.
Oh, wow. On the topic of high value in cheap multicolored spells, we have kind of the king of that. Lightning Helix is red and a white for an instant, and it reads, Lightning Helix deals 3 damage to any target, and you gain 3 life. UFO, why don't you tell us more?
Oh, they let Healing Salve deal damage.
Yes, this is quite literally Lightning Bolt with Healing Salve stapled to it.
Yep.
Anyway, Lightning Helix is very good. Two mana for 3 damage is a rate that people are very happy to pay, oftentimes with a few downsides in our format where you can't hit face or you have restrictions on timing or targets. So 2 mana, 1 red, 1 white to deal 3 damage to any target and gain 3 life at instant speed is just so nice to have. Obviously, the color means that it's not always going to be in every single deck, but the decks that can run it almost always will. The life total delta that it can make, even when just going face, is very big. The defensive pieces that it offers are huge. There are many black decks right now that are running Moment of Craving, 2 mana, 1 in a black for -2/-2 to a creature and gain 2 life. And functionally, Lightning Helix is better than Moment of Craving in both those metrics.
Yeah, it gets to do a lot of stuff. It's just 2 mana do things that you want to do, and like you're never gonna play. Okay, you will very rarely play a card that just says gain 3 life unless you're doing something broken with it. Like there's not gonna be time. There's gonna be very few times where that comes up, but like just stapling that to a bolt just means, oh, I got to gain 3 life, which can matter a lot when racing aggro, for example. You ever just get to kill whatever creature they played on 3 and then also gain 3 life? It just sets them so far behind in the damage that they need to do.
I am so excited to cast this before attacks when I'm staring down an on-crop crasher and like my opponent being like, okay, I'm totally planning on making you unable to block, pushing in like 5 damage here, and instead I'm netting 3 life.
And also life from the block that they couldn't. You're not just netting that life, you're also netting the life from like, oh, your Elder Greg can block still. Huh.
Yeah. And so they just can't attack there. And like there's a lot of situations where Lightning Helix is absolutely fantastic, and it is single-handedly the reason why I want to get into more aggro decks and into pyromancer decks now.
Yeah.
Also, I would say that the addition of Lightning Helix, Electrolyze, and Bolt means that Jeskai Control gets a bit of a new identity where it has this sort of slow burn side plan.
Yeah, also not even to get too much into this, because this is a sort of new strategy that myself and some others have been talking about, is the tempo mid-range decks, which get to play a very normal early tempo game but get to bridge into the late game. This just gives the Jeskai version of that so much power. Being able to have early cheap removal makes the sort of game plans that those decks want to play so much better.
This is definitely a really notorious card that's going to do a lot of stuff to this format. The final notorious card that we're getting out of the Mystical Archive is Putrefy, which is 1, a black and a green for an instant that says destroy target artifact or creature. It can't be regenerated. Joker Bunny, take us home.
Yes, and home you will be when you get to cast this card, because this gets into green-black control decks, as I know that you've been fond of in the past, Seismic. And just like even the green-black mid-range decks as well. And I think one of the biggest parts about this card that people are not going to respect is instant. We obviously don't have cards that care about regenerate yet on Arena, but once we do, that's also going to be relevant. Just being able to hit stuff like that it's only going to come up once or twice once that gets added, but once it does, it's just going to be like, the stock on this card just goes up. But people have been sort of underrating this card, honestly, in the Discord, just in conversations I've had with people. Just not really respecting the fact that this is 3 mana, instant speed, kill most of the stuff you care about. Sure, it can't target walkers or enchantments like Maelstrom Pulse can, for example. Maelstrom Pulse being the same mana cost, but it's a sorcery and can destroy target non-land permanent and every other non-land permanent with the same name as it. But that's a different card. But this is just 3 mana, instant speed, die. Kill their creature. Kill their... We've talked about a bunch of powerful artifacts this episode. Kill their Paradox Engine. Kill their... There's just a lot of stuff that this gets to hit, and it's just cheap. 3 mana isn't a lot. It can be a lot sometimes, but it isn't that much. And you just get to do this, untap, and then you're set to go. You're good to go.
It's pretty cheap for green-black especially, which is a deck that oftentimes will at least have some potential to cast this on turn 2 or cast this easily on turn 3. And this is, without a doubt, a green-black Abrade. And Abrade has made so many waves in this format, and I think that Putrefy will be fairly similar.
Yeah.
Artifacts are less needed to be killed at this current moment, but they're still not bad.
Like, I think people will underrate the amount of times that this can just target Maze Mind Tome to prevent your opponent from gaining 4 life, or
from drawing 3 more cards.
Yeah, or Embercleave. Embercleave hates this.
Oh wow.
Maybe you're playing a deck that really hates seeing a Shadow Spear.
Yeah, or sort of Body and Mind that gives pro green, which can be problematic for some of those decks as well.
Yeah, I think that its use is going to be mostly as a easier to cast murder in the list that it's playing, but the artifact option is quite nice.
100%. And talking about really nice, this has been a nice set review. This week we're not going to be having a puzzle just because of the fact that it's a longer episode, because it's a really big set review. We talked about 40 cards, and there's already going to be a lot of content already, and we didn't want to make this episode any longer. So until next time, it's been me, Joker Boney.
It's been UFO.
I've been your third clown, Seismic.
And this has been Lightning.
And if you like this chicanery and have stuck around to the end, you might want to know that we have a Patreon set up where you can join and support for various tiers. As the Discord is opened up, Patreon tiers will give you special roles and swag on our Discord, but otherwise, it will just be supporting the cast and keeping us able to make this as frequent as we do.
You let the light stay on. For every Patreon, we get to keep one of those stars in the background of the shot. That gets to stay on longer because you're helping us.
True.
And also make sure to check down below for a Discord link to join the Discord so you can talk with members of the Gladiator podcast and other people that enjoy the show about Magic and other stuff. And, as we do more things, there will be more stuff there. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on the YouTube channel. And if you're on any of the wonderful places where this podcast can be found, make sure to, just whatever you can do on that, honestly, just, share this show with friends if you've enjoyed it, and have a good day.
Indeed. Elder Greg thanks you.
Does Elder Greg wear dad glasses and khakis, or
corduroy pants and those big square frame glasses? Yes.
Ooh, okay. All right. So Elder Greg is super dad mode. Who's the son to Elder Greg?
Whenever Elder Greg attacks or blocks, choose one. Make a bad dad joke.
Okay.
Comment on someone's fashion.
And also gain 3 life.
And gain 3 life.
Or draw a card and complain why kids have it too easy these days.
Oh, no. So it's make a 3/3 beast, disappoint your kids, make a dad joke, draw a card, and gain 3 life, talk about buying a boat.
Okay, actually, choose one. Make a 3/3 beast, but also insist to your kids that you're not getting another 3/3 beast.
Uh-huh.
Is drawing a card when you stop at the McDonald's and order only a black coffee?
No, you're not John Mulaney.
Yeah, no. We're not monsters.
You draw a card and complain how you definitely had it worse when you were younger. Walked uphill both ways.
Oh, no, wait. So
how you had to be on a blue creature back then.
Oh, am I going to feel bad about playing this card because it's a boomer now?
No. So sorry. So draw a card is when you tell kid when you're sitting in a pub and you're like, I could do that watching sports on TV.
Anyway,
there's a lot of opportunities with drawing,
especially in green, especially
yes.
with how people have felt about it. I love it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know if this made it in, but thank you all for listening, even if it's just UFX. Our shenanigans are appreciated, I'm sure.
Thank you for everything that you do, Effie. Seriously, nothing short of a miracle is what you do by making this possible.